Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the San Francisco Board of Supervisors meeting for Tuesday, March 21st, 2017. Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Thank you, Madam President. President Breed.
Here.
Breed present. Supervisor Cohen. Supervisor Cohen. Here. Cohen present. Supervisor Farrell. Farrell present. Supervisor Fewer. Fewer present. Supervisor Kim. Kim present. Supervisor Peskin.
Present.
Peskin present. Supervisor Ronan. Ronan present. Supervisor Safai. Present. Safai present. Supervisor Sheehy.
Present.
Sheehy present. Supervisor Tang.
Present.
Tang present. Supervisor Yee. Yee present. Madam President, all members are present.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. Madam Clerk, do you have any communications?
I have none to report, Madam President.
Okay, colleagues, are there any changes to the February 7, 2017 board meeting minutes? Seeing no changes, is there a motion to approve those minutes? Moved by Supervisor Yee, seconded by Supervisor Safai. Colleagues, can we take that without objection? Without objection, those meeting minutes will be passed after public comment. Madam Clerk, please call the next item.
The special order at 2 p.m. is the mayor's appearance in this chamber. Honorable Mayor Edwin Lee, there being no questions submitted from supervisors, the mayor may address the board for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for being here today. Since there were no questions that were submitted, would you like to make any remarks?
Please. Thank you, President Breed. Supervisors, thank you for inviting me here. And to the public, thank you for being here this afternoon. I'd like to follow up on the State of the City speech by discussing how we work together in our city. On Thursday, the President signed a blueprint for his proposed 2018 budget. And if the President gets his way, housing, homeless, arts programs will be cut from 20 to 30%. Around the nation, critical services will face severe funding shortages, including Meals on Wheels, free school lunches for children, after-school programs, legal aid to the poor. While it may seem that we are under attack by all sides, we have a proven track record that we are stronger when we stand together. We in the city work together to build a budget that helps and not harms our poor, our working and middle-class families. We know that San Francisco has been successful because we invest in our children, in our people, in our communities. We came together to establish programs like the Dignity Fund, the Children's Fund, our Affordable Housing Fund. And we've made investments in our job training, our after-school programs, and our small businesses. We protect our seniors, our children, and our families, and that is why we succeed here and why we will continue to succeed. We helped lead a day of action in February to support the American Care Act. But last week we learned that the proposed replacement plan for the ACA will deprive 24 million people of insurance. By 2026, an estimated 52 million people across the country could be uninsured. We know that could be disastrous for our city, as more than 240,000 residents depend on some form of the ACA or Medicaid. We are urging Congress to take action and fight back against these harsh policies. Today, I joined other mayors across the nation to demand comprehensive immigration reform, not walls and travel bans and random ID checks. Many of you joined me and members of our immigrant communities as we celebrated San Francisco's refusal to join any national registry based on religion or ethnicity. So working together, we're able to provide representation for San Franciscans at deportation hearings, And we are committed, and we have committed $14 million over the next 2 years for immigration-related causes. We are supporting the San Francisco Interfaith Council on its Immigration Defense Fund, which will provide resources for nonprofit organizations fighting for immigrant rights throughout the Bay Area. And last week, hundreds of people gathered at St. Peter's Church in the South of Market District to learn how to defend their immigrant neighbors. This is what we mean when we say we stand shoulder to shoulder. It is also National Arts Advocacy Day today. And on the front steps of City Hall, we have been rallying with artists and advocates to protect vital arts and cultural programs that make San Francisco, San Francisco. So when we stand together and work together, we are the city that solves problems together. We showed that earlier this year when we worked with our labor groups to agree on 2-year contracts that are equitable and fair. And by coming together, those groups helped ensure that our fiscal health remains in good order and that our residents will receive vital city services. So as we develop the next year's budget, we must be responsible and disciplined due to the uncertainty on the federal level and threats to our vital services and programs. But we will also not allow misguided policies to define who we are. We will prepare ourselves with plans that work for our residents. We will persist in the fight against discrimination and intolerance, and together as a city, we'll achieve progress towards a better future. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And with that, we will return to our regular agenda. Madam Clerk, please read the consent agenda.
Items 1 through 4 are on the consent agenda. These items are considered to be routine. If a member objects, an item may be removed and considered separately.
Roll call vote.
On items 1 through 4, Supervisor Sheehy.
Aye.
Sheehy, aye. Supervisor Tang.
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Yee. Yee, aye. Supervisor Breed.
Aye.
Breed, aye. Supervisor Cohen. Cohen, aye. Supervisor Farrell. Farrell, aye. Supervisor Fewer.
Aye.
Fewer, aye. Supervisor Kim. Kim, aye. Supervisor Peskin.
Aye.
Peskin, aye. Supervisor Ronan.
Aye.
Ronan, aye. Supervisor Safai.
Aye.
Safai, aye. There are 11 ayes.
Those items are passed unanimously. Next item.
Item 5 is an ordinance to adopt and implement Amendment Number 1 for fiscal year 14 through 17, a memorandum of understanding between the city and the Municipal Attorneys Association to implement base wage increases for fiscal years 17, 18, and 18 and 19, and to extend the terms of this agreement through June 30th, 2019.
Colleagues, can we take this item, same house, same call? Without objection, the ordinance is finally passed unanimously. Next item.
Item 6 is an ordinance to amend the planning code and the zoning map to create and reflect the Calle 24 Special Use District, generally bounded by 22nd Street, Potrero Avenue, Cesar Chavez and Cap Streets, as well as 24th to Bartlett Streets, and to affirm the CEQA determination and make the appropriate findings.
Same house, same call. Without objection, the ordinance is passed unanimously. Next item.
Item 7 is an ordinance to amend the administrative code to require that all cash-out proceeds received by an owner of an affordable housing development, supported in whole or in part by taxpayer funds, shall be used only for residential and tenant services and the creation, development, and preservation of affordable housing.
Supervisor Farrell.
Thank you, President Breed. Colleagues, before we get to the meat of this item, there are a number of amendments that I've handed out that I gave to your offices yesterday. They're in front of us. I'd like to, I'm happy to discuss them if anyone has any questions, very much so, but otherwise would like to make a motion to adopt those amendments before we get to the meat of the item.
Okay, Supervisor Farrell, I apologize. Do you have an explanation of the amendments?
Sure, happy. Why don't I just go into them? So a few of the amendments. First of all, there was concerns about a developer fee being restricted. Remove any reference to developer fee to make the policy more clear. It was never the intent to regulate developer fees, and I want to make sure that was stricken from the record. There was concern that the legislation didn't allow broader community development. To that end, we specifically made sure that any spending in accordance with IRS Code 51C3 was permissible. and it allows for any kind of spending with the cash out proceeds, just not on political spending. And then there were concerns about implementation. There was a lot of back and forth between our Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development and the developers, and so we just took out any references to how these funds would be restricted, and would leave that up to policy discussions between our Mayor's Office of Housing. So it was 3 simple amendments in response to a lot of meetings over the last 2 weeks that I just want to make sure were in the record.
Okay, and seeing no comments specifically about the amendments? Okay. So Supervisor Farrell has made a motion to amend. Is there a second on seconded by Supervisor Tang? So before we adopt the amendments, Supervisor Farrell, before I move on to other members of the board, is that all you wanted to say?
No, after we adopt the amendments, then I'd like to say a few things.
Okay, so I think there's some questions on the amendments. Okay. Supervisor Peskin.
Thank you, Madam President. I'm, for the sake of procedure, if I'm fine with adopting the amendments, and I will speak further to why I would vote against this as amended or not as amended, but there is one issue relative to the amendments that I think is self-evident and unnecessary and already a matter of law, which is on page 3, the amendment that says may not be expended for participation in supporting or attempting to influence a political campaign for any candidate or ballot measure. The law is already abundantly clear that nonprofit organizations cannot support or oppose any candidate for any office at the state, local, or federal level. So I think that language, any candidate, is already the law. So I think it's really specific to ballot measures, but I'm going to vote against the item as amended or not amended. I'm happy to speak to why, but I thought that language was unnecessary.
Thank you, Supervisor Peskin. Supervisor Farrell.
To Supervisor Peskin's comment, that's fair enough, and I'm happy to strike that from the amendments.
Okay, so with that, colleagues, can we take the amendments specifically without objection? Without objection, the amendments pass. Supervisor Farrell.
Are you okay? All right. So, colleagues, to the meat of the item, I think at this point everyone knows where I'm coming from on the issue, but I just wanted to reiterate. Last year we saw affordable housing developers refinance affordable housing projects built with a mix of taxpayer dollars, make millions off these transactions, and spend that money on private political campaigns. Call me crazy, but it seems to me common sense would dictate that precious local affordable housing dollars should be spent on affordable housing needs and priorities, but it's not the case on the ground today. Local affordable housing developers are refinancing buildings with multiple notices of violations against these buildings, including low-income seniors that are going without hot water for months, and publicly reported fears about being evicted in retribution for reporting those issues, and then using these refinancing proceeds for political campaigns instead of providing hot water for their residents. To me, it's appalling. Thankfully, this developer is under investigation. I firmly believe that we should ensure every penny available for affordable housing in San Francisco is being solely used for affordable housing needs, period. This legislation itself went through a standard legislative process. As my colleagues will attest, at Land Use Committee, there was zero opposition raised publicly until this board was getting ready to vote on it 2 weeks ago. Not one person turned out to committee after the bill had sat for months. And over the past few weeks, however, I've heard some concerns, and those amendments address them to as much as we can find common ground on this issue. I've been meeting with developers and others in the community to come up and try to find common language that still meets the goal. Now, I know most affordable housing developers are doing the hard work of structuring complicating financing deals, building affordable housing, providing tenant services, improving the lives of the communities they represent. I support this work immensely. I think we all do, and I want to see it continue. My intent with the policy is to ensure that public dollars invested in affordable housing continue to be used for affordable housing needs and priorities that we all know we must address. When we as a city government allocate money for affordable housing, we're very clearly saying that it's what we, as representatives of the public interest, believe is the best use of those funds. Plain and simply, we shouldn't be giving away any taxpayer dollars and allowing affordable housing developers, or quite frankly, I think this is really important, or anybody else that receives public dollars, to use these funds for private political campaigns. Our taxpayers demand more from us, and they should. We already have Section 12G in our code, which restricts public funds during the budget process from being used for political purposes, but we found a loophole now that's been exploited, and we need to close it. And I want to go over a few issues raised by some of these developers over the last 2 weeks. First of all, they mentioned that the ordinance was developed without the input of nonprofits. First of all, I want to be very clear that prior to introducing this legislation, I did discuss this policy with a number of local developers, affordable housing developers, to ensure this would not harm the production of badly needed affordable housing. I believe the ordinance appropriately addressed their spending needs, short of allowing direct political contributions, which is the core of what the issue is right now. In my conversations, it became very clear that we differed philosophically on whether cash-out proceeds should be treated as public dollars or not. I do not believe that public funds should be used for private campaigns, period. Some feel and stated privately that they should not be able to use the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development dollars for non-affordable housing needs, and I simply disagree with that. They said that, second, they said they needed flexibility without burdensome government regulations. Again, this ordinance, and I appreciate Supervisor Peskin's comments, allows spending to be done in accordance with 501c3 under the federal tax code. That is fine, and I wanted to make sure that we included that. These people have incredible missions, and we want to support them. And they said they have broader community, they do use these funds for broader community purposes. And I added provisions, again, in accordance with 501c3 to include community services. With the amendments introducing today, this expands the uses to all community services, just not political campaigns. Finally, they said this shouldn't be an ordinance, and this is where I think is interesting. What's astounding to me is that some of the developers would actually be willing to support this policy if it was not an administrative law that we passed, but a policy implemented by our Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development. Developers are asking for this not to be an ordinance because they feel it unfairly maligns them, and they're asking for the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development to develop a policy instead. Look, I encourage our Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development to develop these policies on anything that they issue. Anytime we use public dollars, especially for affordable housing, it shouldn't go to private political campaigns. Again, period. To me, as a legislative body, we should be signaling the parameters in which we believe public dollars should be spent. I think it's a height of hypocrisy to say we don't want a law, but we'll support a policy on this issue. And I also want to repeat, I commend the work that all these organizations do. We simply very much differ that these organizations, or any organization for that matter, should be able to leverage public dollars, refinance properties, and use those funds for private political campaigns. That is tantamount during our budget process to giving people direct spending, direct dollars, and saying use them for private political campaigns. I don't believe we should be doing that here in the city of San Francisco. I don't believe that's a wise use or an appropriate use of taxpayer dollars. Affordable housing is built on very complicated financing deals. I recognize that. In light of impending federal cuts to HUD, or just the generic structure of HUD right now and the development of affordable housing, don't we want every single available affordable housing dollar to go to community development and housing here in the city of San Francisco and affordable housing? Do we want public investment in affordable housing to be returned to affordable housing, or do we want it to be used on private political campaigns? To me, the answer is clear, and colleagues, I hope I have your support.
Thank you, Supervisor Farrell. Supervisor Kim.
Thank you, President Breed, and just wanted to add my thoughts to this ordinance, this proposed ordinance, and why I will be opposing it today. Now, I just want to start out by saying there is nothing wrong with raising concerns with how anyone spends their money. All of us here in this chamber do it, and all of us work hard to expose the source of revenue which funds campaigns that we are opposed to. And there's nothing wrong with making sure that everyone is following the law and the rules by calling for an investigation. But government and this board does not punish entities who spend money on speech we disagree with by restricting or prohibiting the First Amendment right to speech. Now, the Board of Supervisors has gotten legal advice that we should be very careful when we craft ordinances when we restrict anyone's First Amendment right, and that we should also refrain from mentioning that the origins, purpose, motivations of a proposal should arise from any concerns that we have about an entity's right to free speech. Yet, the very origins of this ordinance came out of press releases, blogs, that specifically targeted one nonprofit affordable housing organization, TODCO, that was utilizing their funds for the purposes of political expression. Specifically, this charge was levied at TODCO for their support of initiatives that the author of this proposed legislation opposed. He wrote, and I quote, "His dark money is supporting Proposition C, D, H, L, M, and X and opposing U and P." The author is on the record for opposing C, D, H, L, M, and X and supporting U and P. The author then goes on to say, I will be promptly introducing legislation to close these current loopholes for good, and we have called for an investigation. Moving forward, any affordable housing project funded with local dollars in San Francisco will be restricted from using these proceeds for anything other than capital improvements to existing affordable housing or the purchase of additional affordable housing, not bankrolling political campaigns. This proposed ordinance, I believe, is dead on arrival. And no insistence that the language of this ordinance is neutral, because it focuses now on all nonprofit affordable organizations versus just TODCO, just like the Muslim ban prohibited immigration from citizens of everyone from these specific nations, not just the Muslims of those nations, or because we're not discriminating viewpoints is going to work. In fact, just 1 week ago on Wednesday, a federal judge, Derek Watson, stated quite simply, quote, the logic of government, referring to the Trump administration, its contentions is palpable. The notion that one can demonstrate animus towards any group of people only by targeting all of them at once is fundamentally flawed. He then goes on further to say, the government, aka the Trump administration, compounds these shortcomings by suggesting that an executive order's neutral text is what this court must rely on to evaluate the purpose. Only a few weeks ago, the Ninth Circuit commanded otherwise. The Supreme Court has been even more empathetic. Courts may not, quote, turn a blind eye to the context in which a policy arose. There's nothing, quote unquote, veiled about the purpose of this legislation. There are press releases, blogs, which clearly state that the intent of this legislation is not to restrict just the spending of money on affordable housing purposes, but to actually expressly prohibit any spending for, quote unquote, especially political purposes. And there's nothing secret about the motives, as newspapers openly write about the author's intent. The San Francisco Chronicle headlines, nonprofit developers oppose campaign donation ban. Next City headline, SF lawmaker targets affordable housing campaign contributions. There's no question what the intent of this legislation is truly about. In fact, no one is hiding the ball on this one, not the author, not the opponents to the legislation, and certainly not the media. Now, even if this board believes that they should and can regulate free speech, I think that there are a number of other problems with this legislation. One, it only targets affordable housing nonprofits versus all nonprofits which receive public funding. Second, it only targets affordable housing nonprofits versus all developers, including market rate developers who spend hundreds of thousands of dollars every election year expressing their free speech, bankrolling political candidates and initiatives. Now, I'm often on the other side of that. I don't like it that market rate developers spend all this money opposing legislation that I author, that I support. And by the way, we provide public funding to these market rate developers, either through direct taxpayer contributions, through upzoning the value of their land, therefore providing them money, or services through our departments like the Planning Department and Department of Building Inspection. I don't like all this money that comes into elections, and I think that money should be heavily curtailed and severely restricted. We need to overturn Citizens United and other harmful decisions which allow money, not voters, to determine the outcome of elections and which candidates and ballot measures win. But we must do this consistently across the board and not curtail the political speech of one group and not others. Finally, as Supervisor Peskin pointed out, this is a non-issue because the IRS already regulates what nonprofits can spend their money on. They prohibit any spending on candidates and place strict limitations on their contributions to other types of political campaigns like ballot measures. So I urge this board to oppose this legislation and any efforts to curtail the free speech of our entities and our residents.
Thank you, Supervisor Kim. Supervisor Peskin.
Thank you, Madam President. I'd like to associate myself with the comments of Supervisor Kim and also acknowledge that I was not in the Land Use Committee when this came up. I was actually being interviewed by the Senate Rules Committee for the Coastal Commission spot and was unable to attend, so my apologies. I would have brought these issues up in committee. And I do want to explore a little bit some of the First Amendment issues that Supervisor Kim touched on. But insofar as this only applies to 100% affordable housing projects, and insofar as virtually every 100% affordable housing project is built by a nonprofit developer, because for-profit developers rarely, if ever, go into that market because it is not as lucrative as being in the market rate development business. I think if we want to get money out of politics, we should apply something like this as broadly as possible. This should apply to the recipients of the Twitter tax break. This should apply not only to 100% deals, but to 80-20 deals that are done by for-profit developers. This should apply to 50-50 deals, albeit there are very few of them in San Francisco, and rather than targeting the free speech of one class of people. But I also think, and I say this from a perspective of somebody who has been the executive director of a nonprofit environmental organization for getting on to over 20 years, that it is entirely appropriate and lawful for a nonprofit to spend money in politics, including for ballot measures, in instances when it furthers the goals of that nonprofit. Here's a perfect example. Supervisor Farrell put a measure on the ballot, Proposition B, to create more money for Rec and Park. And indeed, the organization I used to work for, the Trust for Public Land, contributed substantial amounts of money to get Proposition B passed, and appropriately so, because it is consistent with their mission. And there are Internal Revenue Service guidelines for a nonprofit 501c3 as to how much money they can spend in the business of politics, albeit never in a candidate race for or opposed. So for those reasons, I can't vote for this, and I do feel that it is designed to chill the lawful free speech of nonprofit organizations, and to that end would like to, through the President, ask Deputy City Attorney Givner whether or not you think this would survive a First Amendment challenge.
Thank you, Supervisor Peskin. Mr. Givner?
Deputy City Attorney John Givner. As you're all familiar, my office is required by the Charter to approve ordinances as to form. Our policy is that we will approve any ordinance as to form if there are colorable arguments that could be made in defense of that ordinance if it passes at the board and is challenged. We have signed Supervisor Farrell's proposed amendment, meaning that at a minimum there are colorable arguments to defend it. Beyond that, as you're also all familiar, whenever there are significant legal issues or legal questions that are raised at the board, my office has a practice of providing you confidential advice in writing, which we don't discuss in the board meetings.
Supervisor Peskin?
The only other thing I would just add relative to the comment I made on Supervisor Farrell's proposed amendments that we haven't voted on yet is that there is the same language that I referenced on page 3 is also on page 4 at line 14. So not that it matters, but I would respectfully suggest through the President to Supervisor Farrell that the words candidate or be removed both on page 4 at line 14 and on page 3 at line 16. But again, I concur with Supervisor Kim and will be voting against this ordinance.
So, Supervisor Peskin, just for clarity, we already approved the amendment, so you would need to make a motion to amend?
Go ahead.
So moved.
Okay, Supervisor Peskin has made a motion, seconded by Supervisor Farrell. Colleagues, can we take that without objection? Without objection, those amendments pass. All right. Supervisor Farrell?
Thank you, President Breed. So, colleagues, I won't belabor the point too much, but I think there's a few important things we need to be very clear about. This in no way at all is prohibiting First Amendment speech. At all. That is false and misleading. This is saying you cannot use public taxpayer dollars for political campaigns. period. If any organization, nonprofit or otherwise, especially nonprofits though that are governed by 501c3 of the IRS code, seek to have a fundraiser to raise money for political campaigns, they're welcome to do so and have private funds contribute to that organization. IRS says you can't spend more than 10% of your proceeds. Not touching that. But what I'm saying is San Francisco taxpayer dollars should not be used for those purposes. Period. And right now, even though during the budget process, and was commented during some comments earlier, the budget process, nonprofits do get city funds, but they are restricted by Section 12G of our code to not spending for political purposes. But guess what? This is a loophole. And it leverages and it uses public dollars that should be repaid to the city of San Francisco or should be used for affordable housing and the building of more affordable housing. I can't believe this body is going to sit here today and vote down an ordinance that says we want to spend more money on affordable housing and not on political campaigns. We believe taxpayer dollars is more appropriately used on political campaigns and the freedom to do that than on affordable housing. It's amazing to me. Supervisor Kim, you mentioned me specifically, and some quotes from a press release. I note that a lot of those funds last year were spent on ballot measures that you proposed. So I find it ironic that you're the one promoting that. Of course you would. Second of all, it was discussion about for-profit housing developers. It's different because they don't take public taxpayer dollars. If they did, then we should restrict them as well. Supervisor Peskin mentioned it should apply to Twitter. If we want to do that in the course of any discussion, we should have that vote. We should have that vote, and we'll have this vote today. I understand there are people opposed to this. But by voting no, we're saying that we believe in giving taxpayer dollars away to organizations for political campaigns. I simply disagree, and I will very much stand by that.
Madam President?
I'm sorry, are you done, Supervisor Farrell? Supervisor Cohen.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Supervisor Peskin. Supervisor Farrell, I just wanted to engage a little bit in the conversation. And Supervisor Kim, maybe you can just listen up because I maybe have a question for you as well.
I'm listening.
Thank you. The way I understand it, the way this conversation is being framed is that these are public dollars being spent in a political nature. The way I understand the nature to be a little bit more nuanced, public dollars are given for nonprofit organizations to make an investment. These nonprofit organizations make a profit, therefore making that private dollars, or is that public dollars? It's not as clear cut for me as it sounds and as it is being presented, and it's unclear to me if there's any kind of legal precedent that says the profit that is made, although public dollars were used in the initial investment, the profit that is made generally goes back into the nonprofit organization, which makes it private dollars, which means that we are restricted from being able to tell the nonprofit developers how to spend their money. And so I think that is where I am in the gray area, where I'm uncomfortable and makes it hard for me to support the legislation, because the legislation is also, I think, because of this gray area, it's unclear that it's going to be challenging to defend should one bring this case against the city and try to bring it before the court. So that is where I am. I don't know if you could speak to that and bring a little bit of clarity. Looks like we're going to have some conversation on it. Madam President, thank you for the time.
So what question, who would you like to address your question?
Thank you. I would like to hear from the sponsor of the legislation, and again, to rephrase my question, is public dollars are used as an initial investment, and a profit is made. Units are sold, buildings are sold, property is sold. That profit that is made is then, in my mind, considered private money. Private money in a sense that it's not taxpayer dollars, although taxpayers' dollars were used to grow the investment. See, it's not as clear cut as it's being presented.
Supervisor Farrell.
Thank you, President Breeden. And Supervisor Cohen, I appreciate that question. That's a very fair one. In the scenario where the Mayor's Office of Housing contributes a few $1 million to a project, and that project is refinanced, and the city is paid back, we have no more funds in that building, it's private funds, whoever they got the funds from, some in bank, whatever. You're absolutely right. I agree with you. What this ordinance says is that so long as there are investment dollars in a affordable housing project, or any project development project, so long as there continue to be Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development dollars in there, if you repay those dollars, you're out. You're not restricted by this. But so long as you leverage and use public dollars, because a lot of times people refinance and continue to hold that Mayor's Office of Housing Community dollars as investments in their property, so long as you continue to do that, you can't cash out and then use it in political campaigns. If you cash out, you got to pay us back first. That's what I'm saying. Look, if we're out of the project, no issues. But so long as the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development has public taxpayer dollars in a project, the first thing that any financing proceeds should go to is to repay the city. But instead, what's happening is they're leveraging the city and our public dollars, cashing out, not paying us back, but using for political purposes. That, to me, is what's wrong. And that's what this ordinance restricts, specifically.
Supervisor Cohen, is your questioning complete? Thank you. Supervisor Peskin.
Does that make sense?
Thank you, Madam President. So I actually was going to speak to the issue that Supervisor Cohen raised. And yes, nonprofits can make money, nonprofit profit, if you will. The Internal Revenue restrictions, the Internal Revenue Code says that those monies cannot be distributed to shareholders, cannot unduly, overly compensate the employees of that nonprofit. But nonprofit corporations are corporations that can make money to further their charitable purposes. In the case of this city, by and through the Mayor's Office of Housing, with affordable housing developers, we provide them, in most cases, loans, usually low-interest loans, that are repaid over time. And that is very different than, and I would absolutely agree with Supervisor Farrell, if the city were making a grant to a nonprofit, and the nonprofit was using that to oppose Proposition P or Proposition U that would have hampered MOH's ability to get affordable housing developers to bid on projects. That I would agree with. But if we give a loan to an affordable housing developer to build affordable housing, that is the charitable intent and purpose. And the nonprofit discharges that duty and builds the 100-unit low-income housing development and subsequently pays the city back its low-interest loan and then chooses to refinance, conventionally refinance, and take money out. It's not our business. It is between God, the Internal Revenue Service, and that nonprofit as to how they use those funds. So here's the interesting thing. In the instant case, the Toddco case, this law would not apply because Toddco paid off all of its loans to the city. It did not owe the city a single penny. So as to the egregious behavior that is alleged herein, it would not apply in the instant case. Many, many nonprofits actually don't cash out at all. As a matter of fact, I checked in with the Chinatown Community Development Center in their illustrious 40-year history, building thousands and rehabbing thousands of units of affordable housing. They have cashed out one project at Wharf Plaza years ago, decades ago. So this is kind of a solution searching for a problem, and in the one alleged egregious case, and it feels like political retribution, it would not have covered that particular case. I urge a no vote and concur with Supervisor Cohen's nuanced analysis of how the city has relationships with nonprofits to discharge their charitable work and carry out our affordable housing mission.
Thank you, Supervisor Peskin. Supervisor Kim.
Actually, Supervisor Peskin covered, I think, the waterfront on this issue and addressed the very question that I wanted to answer that Supervisor Cohen had asked about, how we differentiate between public funding, direct public contributions to nonprofit organizations, affordable housing organizations, and of course, these cash out proceeds. And I was also going to state that this is actually truly a non-issue and is not going to address, I think, some of the concerns that Supervisor Mark Farrell brought up. I just want to reiterate again, I don't like it when people spend money on campaigns to oppose legislation that I put forward to the voters either. But I'm not here standing before you presenting and introducing legislation to restrict their political speech either. So we can talk about how we don't like how money is spent, we can debate it, we can criticize it, we can call investigations into it, but it is absolutely wrong for this board to prohibit free speech and to penalize or try to penalize people who speak against the things that we believe in.
Thank you, Supervisor Kim. Supervisor Ronan.
I will also be voting no on this legislation and won't repeat the excellent explanation of both Supervisor Kim and Peskin. But I just wanted to say that Supervisor Farrell, the way that you speak about these private political campaigns makes it sound very simplistic and nefarious. But oftentimes when affordable housing developers choose to educate the public about a certain ballot measure, it's because that ballot measure will make it easier or harder for them to build the affordable housing that you say that you want them to prioritize the funds to build, or they're giving their opinion about what income level should be eligible for that housing. And that's, to me, feels like a very appropriate use of funds of a developer choosing to exercise their political speech. So I will also be voting no on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Ronan. Supervisor Farrell.
Thank you. And again, I appreciate these comments, I think, to Supervisor Ronan. I just fundamentally disagree with you. I don't believe public dollars should be used for political purposes, whether I agree with what those political purposes are or not, whether they're supporting something I support or disagreeing with something I support. I just don't believe in that. I don't believe that's an appropriate use of taxpayer dollars, period. Again, if this organization wants to privately fundraise for that, all good. But public funds that we give out, our mayor's office of housing gives out, absolutely not. Totally inappropriate. And I appreciate the comment. I think Supervisor Cohen's question was a great one. But again, it's very clear here. If you have an affordable housing project funded by taxpayer dollars and you pay the city back, no problem. This ordinance does not apply. Let me be very clear. I'm going to read from the ordinance here. This ordinance applies during any period while a loan, grant, or other funds provided by MoCD remains outstanding. Again, remains outstanding. So you are leveraging private dollars and not paying the city back, instead cashing out for political campaigns. I think it's wrong. And I know there's an affordable housing cabal that has a majority of the votes on this board of supervisors, and that's fine. But I will stand on principle to say I do not believe that we should be funding political campaigns with public taxpayer dollars, period.
Thank you, Supervisor Farrell. Supervisor Cohen.
Thank you very much. Just wanted to jump back in here and make sure I'm following this correctly. So you take public dollars, you make an investment, you turn a profit, you're able to pull, you make, out of that profit, you pay back the mayor's office of housing. Is that correct? Right. If you pay back the mayor's office of housing, then this piece of legislation doesn't apply to any nonprofit. So it also seems, it seems like if that is the case, then if a nonprofit is interested in engaging in political activity, that's fine. You're just not, you're restricted on using public dollars, and you must pay back MOH first. So I just want to make sure, and perhaps Supervisor Kim, maybe you can help me a little bit on this one. In terms of you're not restricting the speech per se, because you'll still have the ability to use the private dollars that you've made from the initial investment to engage. Am I following that right? Maybe Supervisor Peskin.
Supervisor Kim.
Except this ordinance doesn't just restrict the dollar amount of the loan.
True.
Right. It restricts the entire cash out proceeds. So if, like Supervisor Peskin said, first of all, there's a number of things. We expressly limited the uses of direct grants to nonprofit organizations from political campaigning. I would be okay with that. In fact, we largely do that. If we want to be consistent and say that any entity that can any type of public subsidy from the city and county of San Francisco tech companies that moved into mid-market tax exclusion area, market rate developers who get subsidies from the city and government of San Francisco, then I think we should have that debate. So any entity that gets any type of public support from the city and county of San Francisco being restricted from spending those dollars on political campaigning and contributions, fine.
So you're talking about consistency.
There's two issues.
Okay.
One is the issue of consistency. The second is that this restricts all cash out proceeds, not just specifically the dollar amount that we have loaned to that affordable housing organization. So one is the issue of consistency. If we're going to do it if we're going to target one group, let's talk about all of them. And the second is we aren't actually just limiting the spending of the loan dollars. We are limiting the entire cash out proceeds, which, I mean, at the end of the day, is largely a non-issue because very few nonprofit affordable housing developers do this, and they will all tell you they always spend those dollars directly back on rehabilitation and acquisition anyway. But I think what we are largely talking about is the symbolic nature and the precedent that we set by approving the ordinance that's before us today.
Madam Chair, may I ask another question?
Supervisor Cohen?
Thank you. Hold on, Supervisor Farrell. And I'm also under the impression that these nonprofits that are engaging in political activity, they're also subject to an audit. Is that not correct? I mean, there's a certain level of scrutiny that is that when these nonprofits rise to that level, that there is an audit that they then go and engage in to ensure that they're not in violation of any of the tax laws, any of our disclosure laws, any of our ethics, or anything like that. I just wanted to make sure that I'm thinking about this correctly. Supervisor Farrell.
And you have your question directed at Supervisor Farrell?
Well, I would love for Supervisor Kim and Supervisor Farrell to answer it if possible.
Supervisor Farrell?
Sure. So in terms of an audit, sure. Every organization subject to a federal 501c3 is a federal tax code, right?
Yeah.
So IRS can come in and audit somebody. Absolutely. They file tax returns. I have no doubt everyone is above board how they file their tax returns here. They're subject to only 10% of their revenues as a 501c3 can be contributed to political spending. That's one kind of category and threshold. What this ordinance does, and it says on top of that, you can't use San Francisco taxpayer dollars for political purposes. It is more restrictive than what the IRS says. Absolutely. And are they subject to audit by our mayor's office of housing community development or anybody who kind of, and our controller's office as it relates to organizations that receive public dollars? Absolutely. But we don't have a law against right now. It's a loophole about these types of cash out proceeds. So we talk about consistency. First of all, we do have Section 12G of our administrative code. To be consistent, that is all public taxpayer dollars. Can't be used for political purposes. But we're making a convoluted argument here that because you leverage taxpayer dollars originally and continue to have taxpayer dollars in your projects, that all of those proceeds are subject to your whim. You could go on a cruise in the Caribbean. I don't agree with that. Specifically, though, my concern is that what we've seen in San Francisco is that they are used for private political campaigns. I think it is wrong. And to the comment about all cash out proceeds versus not, look, I wasn't a finance major, but it would seem to me that if 10% of a project was the Mayor's Office Housing Community Development funds, as soon as that 10% was raised from a refinancing, the Mayor's Office of Housing Community Development should be paid back first. Pay the city back. Get us out of the financing game. Get yourself out of the public taxpayer game. That's great. No problem. Have no issues here. The only issue that this addresses and this ordinance addresses very specifically is what can you continue to have loans or funds outstanding from a Mayor's Office of Housing Community Development. And when you refinance a project to what Supervisor Cohen mentioned, you don't pay us back, but instead you just siphon that money off and use it for what you want to use for, in this case, in particular, political campaigns. I believe that's wrong.
Thank you. And it looks like there's still continued discussion, but we have 3 commendations and we are way past 2:30. So I am going to break from this discussion so that we can acknowledge some honorees we have here today. And so with
President
that...
Breed, I'm happy to call
Yeah, let's just call the vote.
to question. Yeah.
Call the vote.
Oh, okay. Supervisor Yee?
I really do appreciate everybody's discussion around this topic.
So I'm sorry, Supervisor Yee. If we're going to continue to have this discussion, I want us to respect the people that we have. We have a lot of honorees here today. It is almost 3 o'clock, and I really want to break from this discussion to honor them so that we can continue with our business at a later time. So I apologize, Supervisor Yee, I'm sorry, and you will be the first person up for your commendation.
In that case, I'll let you do that.
Okay. Supervisor Yee, you're up.
Wow. Okay. Give me a second here. Okay, colleagues, many of you have already read or heard of about the president's budget blueprint and heard about how the proposed federal funding cuts would greatly impact critical meal programs for seniors and adults with disabilities, such as Meals on Wheels. On March 22nd, 1972, President Nixon signed into law the Older Americans Act Nutrition Program, which amended the Older Americans Act of 1965 and established a national nutrition program for seniors 60 years and older. San Francisco seniors and what you have, seniors make up about 25% of our city's population, and the number will grow to over 30% by 2030. Last year, I was proud to co-sponsor the Historic Dignity Fund with other supervisors, which passed, establishing a baseline funding of $38 million. Dedicating and supporting services for seniors and adults with disabilities. The need of seniors range from affordable housing, eviction protection, health care, nutrition, and more. Earlier this month, I sponsored a hearing on the wide and growing needs of seniors and aging adults with disabilities in our city. Dozens of seniors and community-based organizations showed up to make public comments. Currently, 1 of 4 San Franciscans, particularly low-income residents and seniors, suffer disproportionately from food insecurity and hunger. Seniors and adults with disabilities are particularly vulnerable given that many of them live on fixed incomes and are homebound, isolated, and live alone. There are many seniors on the wait list. In a city where we have vast amounts of wealth and access to agricultural-rich regions, we should not have people suffering from hunger. With the growing cost of living in San Francisco and most seniors living in fixed incomes, the need for access to healthy and nutritious and affordable meals is especially critical to the health and well-being of seniors. Seniors should not have to choose between spending for food or for medical needs. For over 40 years, Meals on Wheels San Francisco has delivered over 1.6 million meals each year. Over 60% of the people that are served, of these seniors, actually live alone. 20% of them would have no food source besides the 2 meals that Meals on Wheels provide each day. And the meals are prepared in their own kitchen in the Bayview. Their drivers deliver meals and safety checks to 3,500 seniors and adults with disabilities across San Francisco. But Meals on Wheels goes beyond just delivering meals. They have a team of drivers do safety checks on the seniors. Dietitians provide nutrition counseling, social workers and volunteers that contact seniors to connect seniors to vital resources. Fact is, funding from programs like Meals on Wheels actually helps save precious tax dollars because they keep seniors out of the nursing homes and prevent unnecessary hospitalization that is often paid for by Medicare and Medicaid. However, unfortunately, funding for the Older American Act has not kept up with inflation and rapidly growing senior population. Meals on Wheels America is already serving 23 million meals than it did in 2005. Meals on Wheels has a successful public-private partnership where every federal dollar is matched by about $3 from other sources. So I want to say that many of us in the chamber, and including the mayor, this past month has delivered a meal to a senior or a person with disability. And I had an opportunity to deliver a meal to Evelina in Apartment said, and I was able to actually deliver a meal to somebody last year too. And what I found was that she was not mobile. She was sitting there, and I could see from her walker, she tried to get up once and she couldn't. And how valuable these meals are for her, because it's very difficult for her living alone to have a meal that's warm and cooked. Not only that, the people, she says this, and last year was the same thing with the other senior I had delivered a meal to. They said that it's really important for me to see somebody come in here, because that often is the only person I see all day long, and that's the person that's going to check on me. In fact, she's so trusting that she gave her key, her house key, her door key, to the person that's going to deliver the meal every day to her, so that the person could just come in because it's too hard for her to get to the door. That's what we see out there. Those are the people we serve on Meals on Wheels. So before I call up the rep from Meals on Wheels, I really want to urge all of you to contact Congress and urge them to protect funding for programs such as Meals on Wheels, which helps keep millions of seniors across America safe, healthy, and cared for within the comfort of their own homes. And these millions also includes so many of our seniors and people with disability in San Francisco. To recognize the critical work of Meals on Wheels, what it does to provide in terms of the social connection and nutritious meals and prevent isolation and premature institutionalization, today I am introducing a proclamation to proclaim March 2017 as March for Meals Month. I am proud to present the proclamation to Ann Quaintance, Chief Government Affairs and Business Development Officer for Meals on Wheels San Francisco. Ann?
Thank you so much, Supervisor Yee, and thank you for all the words that you just said. And thank you to all the Board of Supervisors who really support Meals on Wheels. I think, as we know, last Thursday we saw the proposed budget, which did include a nearly 18% million cut to Health and Human Services, percent budget to Health and Human Services of the $83 billion budget, of which includes the Older American Act. The outpouring of support that we have felt from the city, both privately, from individuals, from our elected officials, is outstanding. And I think the coverage we're getting will ensure that if we do receive that cut, I think we will look at our city and our state and our private individuals to help us backfill those funds. It is the service we provide. As we all know in San Francisco, those 3,600 seniors rely on us and rely on the friendly visit and the safety check, as do their neighbors, their caregivers, their sons, their daughters. And that is what makes Meals on Wheels so special, is that we are really there for that client who really needs us, and it really brings the community together. And that's really what makes it kind of a win-win. So between the private and public funding and the leveraging, bringing our community and engaging those to really value our seniors is what it's all about. This proclamation is something that really drives that home, gives us an opportunity to remind all of us how important it is. We do receive 15 to 20% of federal funding to run our programs in San Francisco. So this proclamation means so much. We're so grateful, Supervisor Yee, and to all of you. And for those of you that will be going out soon to see a client in your district, I look forward to it, and we can't wait. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for your work. We appreciate your service to our senior community. Thank you very much. And with that, Supervisor Cohen.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I know you came for the exciting part. I know you didn't come for that long debate about public funds and dollars and tax money. And that will be to be continued if you want to stick around for some more action. But in the meantime, I want you guys to put your hands together and welcome Miss Etta Jones to come on down here. This is such an incredible woman. I'm so excited to be able to present to her this humble accommodation that will come and humbly memorialize the work that she has done for a very long time. Now, on a personal note, you need to know, this lady, I went to elementary school with her kids. Her sons are a little bit younger than me, but and more in line with my younger sisters, but this was a woman that was like a room parent. She was always on the field trips. She was always volunteering her time, and so it is extra special to stand here and to celebrate her. So I want to recognize Ms. Etta Jones and her service to Hope SF and Alice Griffith Public Housing Community as the education liaison. As I mentioned, she has lived education from very early on in her career, and has had an impact on my personal life. So it is a special privilege to stand before her and to recognize her work with Hope SF, because it's come full circle. She started with me in elementary school, and now here we are. I'd like to share a little bit more about her. She's originally from San Antonio, Texas, a proud graduate of an HBCU called Prairie View Agriculture and Mechanical University, and it is there that she earned her degree in sociology and education in 1977. Shortly thereafter, in 1979, she and her family relocated to the San Francisco Bay Area. Mrs. Jones has worked in urban communities, providing educational support for over 3 decades. She's worked with many different constituencies over the years, including people living with HIV and AIDS, young mothers in the Western Addition, and special education students. We're very lucky to have Ms. Jones and what she has brought, and the wealth of knowledge that she has brought to and experience to Urban Strategies team, as well as to the Alice Griffith community. And for those of you that don't know, Alice Griffith is a small public housing development in the southeast corner of San Francisco, in what we call the Flatlands in Bayview Hunters Point.
And also known as Double Rock.
And Supervisor Breed likes to point that out. For you natives, you know what that is. Yeah, yes. All right, yes, Double Rock. But the government name is Alice Griffith. And in her role as Urban Strategies Education Liaison, Mrs. Jones has been instrumental in implementing community benefits, implementing the community building and parent engagement strategies that, quite frankly, has led to a tremendous improvement in our young scholars, our young students' attendance, and as well as their academic achievement. She's played a tremendous role in building the community based on education partnerships and documenting the personal accounts of the lives of the families with the children that are living in public housing. Sometimes they even go undocumented and unacknowledged. She's also a fantastic artist. She created for me a beautiful memory book a few years ago. She's a very talented photographer as well. So please put your hands together and welcome Ms. Etta Jones.
First of all, I'd like to say that I am really humbled and I am really appreciative of this acknowledgement. I'm just so reminded of Marian Wright Alderman, who is the former president of the Children's Defense Fund of Washington, D.C., and she says that service is the rent we pay for living. So it has truly been a service to be a part of a team of Urban Strategies who entered into a community that had been so left out and so far forgotten, and especially for the children to be able to work and provide educational services and opportunities, and then to acknowledge the children and to acknowledge their families. What has been most significant for me has been the working with the partners in the school district, San Francisco Unified School District, Sushi Foundation, the San Francisco Police Department. It's just been a pleasure to work with the YMCA. It is important that the work is accomplished, but we can't do it alone. We must have the partners involved with us. So once again, thank you all so much, and I really appreciate this honor and this acknowledgement.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Ms. Jones, and thank you so much for your service.
Thank you for all the folks that came to celebrate Ms. Jones. Will you stand up? All the educators that are here with us that came today. Thank you. Thank you to all the educators that have dedicated their lives to educating young minds. We're grateful.
Thank you. Thank you for being here today. Okay, our final commendation for today is going to be given by Supervisor Kim.
Thank you, President Breed, and I know that you have some words as well for the group that I'm about to bring up. I want to bring up our San Francisco Interfaith Council, Episcopal Community Services, and our Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing to the podium. So this past winter, as in each winter, the Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing, in partnership with the San Francisco Interfaith Council, Episcopal Community Services, and many of our local churches, partnered to provide emergency shelter during our winter months from November 20th to February 25th, when we know our streets get just a little bit colder, and in particular this winter, much wetter. I want to take the time to acknowledge and appreciate all of the churches and organizations who participate to expand shelter capacity this past winter. Without you, 100 to 200 additional people would have spent each night on the streets for the last few months in our cold and rainy weather. One of the top concerns of the constituents that I represent, and certainly here in the city, are how we address homelessness and encampments. The reality is both the housed and unhoused agree that no one should be on the streets. No one wants to see the encampments with the neglect brought on by years of federal and state divestment from public housing and affordable housing and mental institutions, and no one wants to see anyone suffer. I wanted to thank and acknowledge the Department of Homelessness, who's represented by Jeff Kaczynski, our director here today, for always working to practically seek out most of our natural allies in resolving the crisis of homelessness, and that in our religious community. I am particularly grateful for our religious institutions that take this on by answering the moral mandate to care for our most destitute, in this case, our homeless neighbors. St. Boniface, St. Mark's Lutheran, St. Mary's Cathedral, the First Unitarian Church. Thank you for doing God's work here in San Francisco. By agreeing to participate in the San Francisco Winter Shelter Program, you are holding true to the values of our religious beliefs, but also the values of the city and county of San Francisco. And having visited some of your churches that open their door, I mean, it's really just, it's a beautiful gesture to those on the nights when we have the most need, and provides a tremendous amount of relief in our city. So thank you for this work, also helping to coordinate meals to those that have opened their doors at night for hundreds of homeless individuals in our street, and want to particularly appreciate Episcopal Community Services for taking on the role of managing and staffing this over the last 3 months. And from the Department of Homelessness, I had mentioned Jeff Kaczynski, but also want to recognize Kathy Perdue, Scott Walton, Sam Dodge, Emily Cohen, and our homeless outreach team. So thank you again so much. And I'm not sure, President Breed, I think you want to add a few words.
Thank you.
To Jeff Kaczynski.
Yes, and I'll just start by thanking each and every one of you for being here. Thank you to Rita Simmel and Michael Pappas for being here and leading the way and being an incredible example. Not only have you worked to help coordinate the faith community for this particular purpose, we know also the work that you did to get our first navigation center up and running, the support that you provided, the work that you continue to do. It makes such a difference in the lives of the people we know are most vulnerable. And I want to say that I'm really proud that the majority of these locations are actually in District 5. When the call came, the churches in our district stood up and basically opened their doors, and I'm just so proud to see each and every one of you here today. First Unitarian Church, SF Night Ministry, St. Mary's Cathedral, St. Mark's Lutheran Church, and St. Vincent de Paul Society of San Francisco. And this is not to ignore St. Boniface and the Episcopal Community Services. You all together create an opportunity for so many people that we know need it the most, especially when we have conditions outside that are just really difficult for anyone to survive in. And so your work and what you do by opening your doors is truly God's work, and it is saving lives. And on behalf of the city, we applaud you. We thank you for your service. And so with that, we will ask Jeff to come up and say a few words.
Thank you, President Breed, and I would just like to echo my thanks to the Interfaith Council, to all of the congregations who participated, to Episcopal Community Services, but especially to the hundreds of volunteers who came out every morning to help serve meals. I had the honor of being able to serve some of those meals with congregants from the Unitarian Universalist Church. It was a great honor to stand with them and just to see the atmosphere that they helped create, the love and the openness that they shared with, and the food with the homeless men who were staying at that shelter was really a beautiful thing. I think this is a wonderful example of how the community can come together to address the needs that we have. As you all know, there's over 3,000 individuals on any given night that are sleeping on our streets in San Francisco. We need to do more, and we need to do better, and I think that this is a great model of how the community can come together to serve the most vulnerable San Franciscans. Thank you from the bottom of my heart, behalf of the department and all the people that we serve. We are just very deeply grateful for all that you've done for the community. Thank you.
And I know that Michael Pappas from the Interfaith Council was also going to say a few words as well.
We are humbled to be here today, and we are grateful. These are the heroes and the 45 congregations that serve meals. If these are the heroes, this is our superhero. And Rita Simmel was here from the very beginning, and I'd like to ask her to say just a few words.
Thank you very much, but I want to remind Michael and all of you that nobody does these things alone, and it's because we are working as a community that we can do this. So I echo Mayor Lee's words, and if we stand together, there's nothing we can't accomplish. Thank you very much for this commendation. We treasure it, and we thank you so much.
And congratulations to all our honorees today, and thank you everyone for your patience. And with that, we will return to our agenda. It's past 3 p.m., and we have a 3 p.m. special order. Madam Clerk, please call that item.
The special order at 3 p.m. is a public hearing for items 17 through 20, continued open from January 10th, 2017. A public hearing of persons interested in the determination of exemption from environmental review under the California Environmental Quality Act issued as a community plan exemption approved by the Planning Commission on September 22nd, 2016 for a proposed project located at 2675 Folsom Street to allow the demolition of 3 two-story warehouse and storage structures and construction of a 4-story, 40-foot-tall residential building. Item 18 is the motion to affirm that this project is exempt from further environmental review under the community plan exemption. Items 19 and 20 are the motions to reverse the Planning Department's exemption determination.
Supervisor Ronan.
Yes, thank you, colleagues. I would like to make a motion to continue items 17, 18, 19, and 20 to the April 18th Board of Supervisors meeting. While I have concerns about this project that have been raised by this appeal, I continue to remain open and hopeful that the parties can come to an agreement that would remove the need for this appeal. As you saw this morning in the San Francisco Chronicle, the CAI 24 Community Council, the same appellants in the instant appeal, came to an agreement with Lennar Multifamily Communities, a project that also sits in the Latino Cultural District. I'm hopeful that the parties can reach a similar agreement here and believe giving them some more time to sit down with one another would help with that process. So, colleagues, I would ask that you would support this continuance.
Supervisor Ronan has made a motion to continue this to the meeting of April 18, 2017. It was seconded by Supervisor Cohen. And colleagues, before we vote on this continuance, we do need to take public comments specifically on the continuance. So if there are members of the public who'd like to speak as it relates to the continuance, please come forward. First speaker, you'll have 2 minutes.
Hi, Laura Clark with YIMBY Action. I know you're going to continue this, but this is why we don't have the housing we need, is because we play games with it. If you want to get developers out of politics, it's time to take the politics out of development. If you want to get rid of a pay-to-play system, we need to stop playing games. We need less discretion in these processes, and we need to say there is housing that we need. Housing delayed is housing denied. It is time to get moving. I understand that you are going to wait on this project a little bit more and have a lot more feels about it and see what more we can squeeze out of various developers, and there's nothing we can do about that here today. But I want to encourage you to get some urgency about the crisis that we are in and how much housing we so desperately need. So I want you to take this in context and pass Home SF as fast as possible. If you really want to take the pressure off of the mission, it is time to build housing in the outlying neighborhoods. That is urgent, and it needs to be passed immediately. Thank you.
Thank you. And could I remind members of the public and those speaking, can we please stick to the subject matter of the continuance? Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. My name is Eric Arguello. I am the president for CAI 24 Latino Cultural District, and we are in support of the continuance. I think it's very important that we meet with the developers to make sure that we come to an agreement and that everything that we talk about benefits everyone, and most importantly, to protect the Latino Culture District and its cultural assets. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Hi, I'm Vincent. I think the continuance is, again, another delay tactic. From an environmental review perspective, I think we've hashed this out many, many times. And this is a perfectly fine development. It will build affordable housing where a lot with nothing in it exists now. A continuance is another opportunity for delay, and delay again after that. We've had this discussion many times, and I'm not sure what additional benefit there is to allowing more private negotiation practice between this developer and the community at large. It seems, I don't know, it seems like how we got into this mess to begin with. And I would urge the Board of Supervisors to consider whether, like Laura said, though not strictly related to this continuance, whether there are measures we put in place to prevent this situation from happening again and again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Hi, my name is Kevin Burke. I'm a renter and a San Francisco resident in District 3. I'd like you to please deny the continuance. The more delays and the more uncertainty we have in the housing process, the harder it is to build. The harder it is to build, the more expensive it is to build in the city because you have to keep lawyers on staff, you have to keep permits open, you have to keep renewing them, you have to keep contracts open. The more expensive it is to build in the city, the higher income requirements that developers need to target, and the harder it is to build affordable and middle-class housing when there are larger discrepancies between affordable and what the market rate rent is for the building. So we should try to make it as certain and as predictable as possible about whether a project will get through the process or not. Secondly, I don't see what this continuance has to do with the environment. We're here to discuss whether this is an appropriate this project has environmental impacts. It sounds like the developer and the group are trying to negotiate to come to an agreement, but it doesn't sound like there are really environmental concerns so much as there are concerns about gentrification and housing in the mission. And I don't see what that has to do with this bill. I don't think we should turn everything into a referendum on gentrification. We should stick to the contents of the meeting. This has been legislated before and at different times. Thanks very much. Please deny the continuance. Thanks.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Larry Mazzola, business manager, Local 38 Plumbers and Pipe Fitters Union. I'm also the president of the San Francisco Building Trades Council. I'm here today to speak in favor of the continuance today on this project and to also clear up a little confusion that you all might be facing right now. When you see some unions within the Building Trades Council come in here and stand up to deny a continuance and rally against a continuance, and other unions speaking for a continuance like myself, might be confusing. So there's a misnomer out there that the building trades is all being supported by this project and it's going to be built 100% union. That is not true. Some unions have gotten the okay in writing that yes, they will be built union, but some unions have not, like the MEPSs, which are the mechanical, the electrical, the plumbing, and the sprinkler fitters. Those are the MEPS unions. Those are the subcontractors, and we have not gotten any commitments to this point. Although we had a conversation with the CEO of Axis yesterday, and it was a good conversation. I think this continuance will give us more time to continue those discussions. But the four trades that I just mentioned have numerous, if not hundreds, of people that live in the Mission District, and those job opportunities would be lost for those people. And those are workers in this city that deserve a good wage and a good benefit package and to live up to the area standards that this city is so proud of. So thank you, and I hope you will continue this item so we have more time to talk to the developer about a lot of different issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hi, my name is Brian Hanlon. I'm the co-founder of the California Renters Legal Advocacy and Education Fund. Regarding this continuance, this is the exact type of process that leads to increased economic and racial segregation, displacement, and rising prices. There is an ocean of academic literature on this topic. Scholarship by Lenz and McConan and Rothwell and Massey come to mind specifically. I'd be more than happy to share it with any of you if you so care. And regarding this specific project, I understand that staff report has found that there is no displacement effect from new market rate development. In fact, new market rate development mitigates against displacement effects, which is also what the Urban Displacement Project at UC Berkeley found. And I understand that there are many community members that feel otherwise. Supervisor Ronan, I would implore you that, leadership is hard. You're going to have people who disagree with your decision one way or another. But I ask you to do the hard thing and explain to your constituents that more housing is needed, that more housing is a community benefit, and that the mission is simply going to turn into a Noe Valley if we close up shop for development. On a personal note, I lived for 5 years on this very block above Isaac's liquor store, and I was displaced in September, and now I'm living in Oakland, and I'm not too happy about it. I blame anti-housing activists for being successful for decades, for not building housing, for my displacement. All of my friends to the person that I knew from back in 2010 are all gone. And as a fitting metaphor, in my last week at my apartment, I stepped outside and I was almost run over by two clearly well-to-do women in jogging gear with really expensive-looking strollers. There's been a real demographic sea change in that part of the mission. Not one new housing development, tons of new luxury rehabs of existing houses, but nothing new. They've moved in and they've displaced other people because we're not building for them. Thank you.
Thank you. And may I remind the public again, can you please keep your comments specifically to the continuance? Otherwise, I will need to stop you and remind you of why you're giving this particular public comment specific to the continuance. Thank you very much. Next speaker.
Welcome to Supervisors. And I want that also, this is my district. I was born there. I've been kicked out. And thank you, Supervisor, for behalf of Arca San Francisco, Dr. Glenn Motolo. I got a place to live in the Arc, Mercy, 1099 Masonic, and Clifford Phillips and Dr. Glenn Motolo. He's the owner of that building. He's going to have a board meeting in there. I want to thank everybody. We got our place, and the one on 6th and Howard. Thank you. On behalf of all the supervisors, we got the lottery. Thank you. Thank you. We all love you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hello, I'm Theodore, resident of Excelsior, and I think you should not do the continuance because part of what makes housing so expensive in San Francisco is because of all these delays. So if the developer, I'm not too concerned about them. They might be able to negotiate 20% affordable, 40% affordable, but they'll be able to do it because the market rate housing will increase in the meanwhile while we wait around for all these negotiations and continuances. So I urge that you approve the project as quickly as possible and help bring market rate housing back down.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Members of the Board of Supervisors, Ray Hartz, Director, San Francisco Open Government, and I echo the comments of many of the previous speakers, but I would like to talk about the continue itself. For you, continuing a matter is really no big issue. You're going to be here, you're going to get paid, doesn't really matter to you. However, when members of the public come here and sit for an hour and a half waiting to make comment and then are told at the last minute, oh, by the way, for our convenience or some other issue, which they're not always sure is accurate or true, we're going to continue this to some future date. People have to take time off work. They have to take time to make arrangements for their children, just myriad things. And I see these continuances being done over and over and over again with little thought given to the members of the public and interested parties who have to come here and want to come here to comment and put in their 2 cents. I also would point out that according to the Sunshine Ordinance, whenever a continuance or a change in the agenda is known, it is supposed to be brought up immediately, and it should have been brought up at the beginning, right after where it says agenda changes. Therefore, members of the public, we would have had this discussion. They could have made their comments on a continuance, and they would not have had to sit here for an hour and a half only to find out that they're not going to be allowed to comment on what they came here to do. I think this Board of Supervisors has shown a long history of disregard for the sacrifice that members of the public make when they come here and sit sometimes. I've come here and sat and had public comment 30 minutes after the beginning of the meeting, and in one case, 7 hours into the meeting. So it's a crapshoot. You really don't know when or if these are going to come up, and this is not right. If you have something on the agenda and you're going to change it, bring it up during the agenda changes. That's the Sunshine Ordinance. And look at your own agenda. It says, know your rights under the Sunshine Ordinance. Read the law and follow it.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hello, my name is Scott Kuiper. I was a resident of the Mission for the 90s and 2000s. Now I'm in SOMA. I work on behalf of many arts organizations. I know that there's a lot of people that wanted to speak on this issue today, hearing that there was going to be a continuance and not here. So I'm in favor of the continuance because there's a large amount of the community that would have spoke on trying to get a better project out of this development that is not currently present. Certainly on the other side, we saw that the contractors union had filled the space earlier, which also meant there's a lot of public that was not able to attend. These are a lot of paid. This is what paid protesting looks like, is they have broken from the rest of the union because they're going to get an economic kickback from this project. These projects are going to happen. Housing is going to get built in San Francisco. What we're seeing is that if the community pushes back, we can get better projects that have sort of been introduced to begin with these higher levels of affordability, with these higher levels of community services, because the developers can afford it and the city needs it. So basically, our current planning code is not demanding enough. That's the only thing I'm in agreement with the folks from SF-BARF that have been speaking before me, is that we would like to see these projects go through as better projects. And we look at you, the leaders of our city, to change our planning codes, knowing what we can get out of these projects with higher levels of affordability and more civic services. So thank you for your time today. We'll talk to you when this comes back up again. I'm overjoyed to hear that the community and the developers are probably going to reach an agreement so you don't have to worry about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker.
My name is Sarah Miles. I'm a neighbor, live a block away from the proposed development. I've lived there for 25 years. I'm very grateful that there will be a continuance. I'm very much in support of that. This development is going to have a huge impact on our neighborhood, on our school, on our families, and we really need time to work out a way in which it can be as little destructive as possible. So I appreciate the time that we can work together to try to make it better.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
I'm here because I came to this previous meeting and there was no chance to express my view. But I very much oppose delay that will turn off the citizen input by simply bothering a lot, and some people get a lot of money for having it come increasingly before professionals that are making money from the delay and to get their way for some people that are getting financial advantage. I pursued a situation where the city made special arrangements for mercy housing, which involved defiance of the state building code in ways that would increase fires. But there was no review, environmental review. It was treated as if it was a partnership between the city and the contractor instead of the city regulating the contractor. But simply the city was presumably getting housing and therefore had all the benefits, and therefore should return some of the benefits to make it easier for the people building the housing to make money. But at the cost of the imagined beneficiaries, the people that would be occupying the housing. They're never given a chance to look at building plans, to see whether it conforms with the fire code.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Hi, my name is Kristen Ponti, and I live directly across the street from the proposed development. I'm in favor of the continuance because I do believe, in spite of what a lot of people have said, that these luxury developments do cause displacement. My landlady's very excited about the thing because she wants to put the building on the market immediately, and I'm very afraid of getting displaced by a real estate speculator buying the building and evicting us. So I live with low-income seniors, disabled people in my building, and I think that the continuance will be helpful for us to try and make a better deal. We don't need more luxury housing. We need affordable housing. The crisis is not caused by housing activists. It's caused by speculators and luxury housing. So thank you for listening, and thank you, Supervisor Ronan.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
My name is Leila Mansour. I live about 2 blocks from the building. This large building is overlooking an elementary school, and beside it is a nursery, or a playground for a nursery that Tom Amiano put into work. None of the children that go to that school or go to that park have any chance of living in this so-called housing. I really have to stand here and question, can you honestly say that this new, more luxury housing is going to help our housing crisis for the people that are displaced? Most of the people that are, this is a very serious decision. We need to take all the time you can to be fair. It's the only way. Once a building goes up, you can't take it down. Once those shadows are gone, once that playground has no sunshine, it's gone. You really do not listen to greed, which is eager to get paychecks out of this. You're all we have as a defense against that greed. Use your conscience. Use your eyes. Look at the neighborhood. It's not appropriate. If it was all, if it was all for us, we'd put up with, maybe it would be worth losing some sunshine. But it's not for us. I live across the street from luxury condos. It's all about flipping. It's all about investment and flipping. Young people who have no investment in the community, displacing, inciting more greed. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
My name is Scott Weaver. I support a 4-week continuance. 4 weeks is not a long time, but if it gives us an opportunity to negotiate in good faith and come to a better agreement, then it will be time well spent. If not, then it's only 4 weeks. No matter what you believe about how market rate housing fits into the scheme of things, a 4-week continuance is not going to lead to the end of life on earth as we know it. We're either going to have a deal or we're not going to have a deal. That's all. Keep this in perspective.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
My name is Lorraine Garcia Nakata. I'm a founding member of the San Francisco Latino Historical Society, and also a former arts commissioner and a federal commissioner with the Latino Museum that we're attempting to create. I'm also an arts and cultural specialist. I've worked many, many years in the Mission District. I am in concurrence with your motion to defer. I also feel that I agree with many of the young people that have come up that have said that they don't understand why it would be deferred. And I agree that they don't understand why it would be deferred, and that, in fact, the time that we are given, that they will be given a range, the project will be informed by a lot of data that is not currently available that will make this project much more successful, and at the same time that it will not follow the patterns of displacement in the same way that has happened throughout the city. So I thank you for your wisdom in delaying. 4 weeks is not a long time, and I will leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. My name is Carlos Bocanegra. I am the housing attorney for La Raza Centro Legal. I just want to take a quick moment to thank you all for your patience and your wisdom in attempting to determine the best course of action for this project and the mission as a whole, and permitting this continuance. While I'm aware that this continuance may be a temporary inconvenience for some, rushing into hasty decisions without waiting for substantive information or permitting good faith negotiation creates a permanent detriment for everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker, please. And if there are any other members of the public who'd like to speak on the continuance, please come forward now.
Good afternoon, David Pilpel. I missed your earlier discussion on this, but I understand that you may have another appeal nearby with related issues. So, and there sounds like there are discussions ongoing, so it makes sense for the continuance. I also think that whatever project happens at this location, the project sponsor should document what's already there with photos and video, because it's not just the mission, but it's the industrial history of the city. It really is the last example of the railroad going through from Folsom to the mission and the buildings that surround it. So some documentation of that history for both the planning department and the public library, I think, would be in order for this project. And I'm not staying for the rest of the meeting, but I'm sure that you'll do an appropriate in memoriam for Natalie Berg. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Tom Gilberti, between now and then, wherever then is, how many seniors that are low income are going to be added to this project? How many graduated foster kids might be living at this project? How many people off navigation systems between now, what the plan stands for now, and where we're going to go to? How many seniors can we move from houses that they're not appropriate anymore? Those are questions, the plans. How many people that actually...
Mr. Gilberti, could you please speak to the continuance?
Well, the continuance is then. We're here right now. And I think if we're going to wait for continuance, how many police officers
whether or not we're going to pause your time, whether or not
I think you get
support
the idea.
or oppose
I can
to...
leave now.
Okay.
Instead of just market rate people, how many people from our communities are going to be able to move in that are from those local zip codes? And I would like to see probably a better balance. I think that's what all these people are saying. Where is the community housing for us now? And that needs to be answered between now and then. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gilberti. And if there are no other members of the public who'd like to provide comment on the continuance, public comment is closed. And Madam Clerk, seeing no names on the roster, please call the roll on the motion to continue the item to the meeting of April 18th, 2017.
Supervisor Sheehy?
Aye.
Sheehy, aye. Supervisor Tang?
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Yee?
Aye.
Yee, aye. Supervisor Breed?
Aye.
Breed, aye. Supervisor Cohen?
Aye.
Cohen, aye. Supervisor Farrell? Farrell, aye. Supervisor Fewer?
Aye.
Fewer, aye. Supervisor Kim?
Aye.
Kim, aye. Supervisor Peskin?
Aye.
Peskin, aye. Supervisor Ronan?
Aye.
Ronan, aye. Supervisor Safai?
Aye.
Safai, aye. There are 11 ayes.
Okay, these items are continued to the meeting of April 18, 2017. All right. Madam Clerk, let's go back to...
Item 7.
Yes, and we were in the middle of a discussion, and Supervisor Yee had the floor.
Got yourself some press today.
Oh, yeah, huh? See if I can remember what it was going to ask.
We can come back to you because Supervisor Kim was also on the...
No, I'll quickly remember. Yes. So this might be addressed to Supervisor Farrell or anybody else. I'm a little, just for clarification, it seems like what I'm hearing today is that this piece of legislation will prevent certain things, and the example that's been brought up with this one nonprofit, it wouldn't apply to them anyways if it were happening today. So I'm wondering, are there any examples of where somebody actually did this? Because if not, I'm wondering why we're passing legislation on this.
Supervisor Farrell?
Thank you, President Breed. To Supervisor Yee's point, yes, the prior examples from last year funding some of the political campaigns did not continue to have Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development dollars in it. But in looking at our laws after that egregious behavior last year, we realized that we are vulnerable here in the city of San Francisco, and I simply don't think we should allow that to happen here in our city.
Supervisor Yee?
And sorry, can I say one other thing? And all of the developers that are fighting this legislation is a proof point. If they have no intent to do it, why would they care in the same way? But they don't want this legislation forward because they don't want to be restricted from using political funds, public taxpayer dollars for political funds. Plain and simple.
Thank you, Supervisor Farrell. Supervisor Yee, no other questions? Supervisor Kim?
I just want to clarify, just because we don't have members of the public speak once we've heard it at committee, on behalf of these nonprofit affordable housing developers who all uniformly oppose this legislation, that they don't oppose it because they use cash out proceeds for political speech. They don't. They don't want us to set a dangerous precedent where the Board of Supervisors unfairly targets one category of entities in their free speech spending. Now, let's talk about leveraging city subsidies, city dollars, cities' values to create profits, right? So nonprofit affordable housing developers do this through MOHCD loans, but so do market rate developers. They take city subsidies, they take the values we confer on their land through upzoning, and they leverage that public subsidy to build profits where they do actually use those profits to go on cruises and political spending. So if we're going to do this, we should do it for everyone. And I think that is specifically what the nonprofit affordable housing developers are concerned with. It's not that this is going to in any way curtail anyone's current activities or history. And by the way, there are very rigorous audits of nonprofit organizations and how much of their hours and monies they spend on volunteering and working and organizing on ballot measures. I know because I used to work at one, and when I filled out my timesheet, I had to specifically enumerate the number of hours I spent working on a ballot measure campaign. It is that we are setting a dangerous precedent by targeting one group and not targeting all. And that's why I will be opposing this today.
Thank you. Supervisor Farrell.
So again, let's be clear about what we're voting on here. We're voting on should we use taxpayer dollars for private and allow organizations to use it for private campaign purposes. That to me is a dangerous precedent we're setting and that we're allowing to continue to exist. And I think it's the height of irony, quite frankly, thinking during this break that was mentioned, quite frankly, I very much agree with it. Citizens United, we need to overturn that and take more money out of our political system. But here we are, some people are going to vote to put more money, and not only just more money in our political system, but taxpayer dollars in our political system. Again, I say we call the question, let's have the vote here. If you think taxpayer dollars should be funded for political campaigns, vote against this. If you think affordable housing dollars from the taxpayers should be used just for affordable housing, support this.
Thank you. Supervisor Yee?
And I'll make this real quick. It's not me a question. I guess I'm just sitting here thinking, mainly because many of you know that I come from the nonprofit world and worked in it for about 30 years and ran an organization. So I'm sitting here thinking, okay, I know we have some loans when we bought a building, and no, we didn't refinance it. But where does it stop? I'm just thinking out loud that where does it stop for us for people in the nonprofit, that one then could take it further? Hopefully not. That you would say, well, since you have an outstanding loan and you're saving, and it's 20 years old, and mainly because you're able to pay rent, using rent money to pay for the mortgage, and then since you're paying this fixed mortgage and the rent doesn't go up, you must be saving money, so you shouldn't be using that savings for any opinion that you have on a ballot initiative. So I question it a little bit, and again, I'm thinking out loud, and it's not really directed towards you.
Thank you, Supervisor Yee. Supervisor Cohen.
Thank you very much. I have maybe a couple questions for the Mayor's Office of Housing. They could kind of weigh in on this. So you've had an opportunity to listen to some of the discussion, and I think for me, going back to the points I was making earlier, I would describe it as gray money, right? So you've got an initial investment of public money, and a profit is made. Is that considered by your department to be public money or private money?
So the way that I would answer that is...
Can you please identify yourself?
Oh, yes. Amy Chan, Mayor's Office of Housing. So the way that I would answer that is if a project has a loan with the Mayor's Office of Housing, we directly, or a ground lease, we directly regulate the project. We don't currently have a policy around cash out proceeds. We've only had a handful of projects that have either MoCD money or a ground lease where we've then gone and on a case-by-case basis negotiated how to handle the refinancing of those projects. That is why our office is going to work with the developer community to create a policy where we would apply the same rules across the board to any project looking to do this kind of refinancing. But currently, we're not regulating across the board how the cash out proceeds are handled. We are regulating any project with the spending of the direct loan funds from MoCD.
All right. And how often does this happen? How often are you seeing nonprofits spending the money that they're cashing out?
So as I've mentioned, we've only seen a handful of cases where there's been a refinancing and a cashing out. There could possibly be others in the future, but it's been a small percentage.
So when you say a handful, I'm just trying to quantify that. Is that 2? Is that 3? Is that 5?
Correct. I think we've had 2 projects.
2 projects.
Where there's existing MoCD funds, outstanding MoCD funds, and they've refinanced and captured cash out proceeds.
And I assume this is public information. Can you tell us which nonprofits they were?
One project was with TNDC, and one project was with Bethel.
Okay. I'm not familiar with Bethel. What is Bethel?
It is a church run out of, I think the project was in District 5.
Okay. And are you able to share with us how the money was used?
We actually, well, I actually don't have the specifics for those 2 projects. I can come back and give you information about that, but we don't. We've negotiated how MoCD recaptures some of those cash out proceeds. Okay. So I don't believe we directly limit how the developers' portions of those funds are spent, but we are negotiating funds to be coming back to MoCD so that we can be using them for purposes of affordable housing.
Okay. And have you, I'm not sure if your department has taken an opinion on the legislation. I would imagine you probably haven't, but I'm going to ask for some of your thoughts around is there a method or a way to put further restrictions on the cash out dollars?
I think for our office's priority, we would like to just see as much of the funds come back to our office as possible, and then we would be using those funds for affordable housing purposes.
And those funds that come back to the office, aren't they required to come back in full?
Currently, no, we don't have a policy around that. We've been negotiating that. We had negotiated that around the 2 projects, but we would create a policy, and we would do that in collaboration with the developer community in terms of what that recapture would look like.
So the dollars go out in the form of a loan.
Yes, from our office.
From your office, yeah, of course.
Existing loans with nonprofits for them to build affordable housing.
But they are required to pay back the loan.
Correct.
Do they pay back interest on that loan?
No.
So it's just the dollar amount that they borrow.
They're soft loans. Yes, correct.
They're soft loans. So the money that they make from the investment, they are able. We'll call it profit. They are able to do what they want with that money.
Currently, unless we're negotiating something different, yes. Although we have, in the cases that we've experienced, we have been negotiating for those funds to be coming back to our office.
Thank you, Madam President. I have no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Peskin.
So I want to appreciate what Supervisor Cohen just asked and say, through the President to the representative from the Mayor's Office of Housing, that to the extent going forward you want to package your loan documents such that a recipient of a loan would have obligations relative to cash out proceeds, I would welcome you pioneering that policy. But let me put before you, colleagues, a slightly different question as we enter the vote than the maker of the ordinance, which is, if you want to chill one subset of political activities' First Amendment rights, vote for this ordinance. If you do not want to chill that First Amendment legal right of expression, vote against this ordinance. And with that, I am ready to vote.
Thank you, Supervisor Peskin. Supervisor Farrell.
I think we should call the question here, but I can't let that stand unanswered. That is completely false, what Supervisor Peskin is saying. This is not chilling free speech. These organizations can use and raise money all they want and use it for political purposes all they want. Don't use taxpayer dollars to do it. That's what this ordinance says.
Thank you. Seeing no other names on the roster, Madam Clerk, on the item as amended, please call the roll.
On item 7 as amended, Supervisor Sheehy?
Yes.
Sheehy, aye. Supervisor Tang?
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Yee?
No.
Yee, no. Supervisor Breed?
No.
Breed, no. Supervisor Cohen?
No.
Cohen, no. Supervisor Farrell?
Aye.
Farrell, aye. Supervisor Fewer?
No.
Fewer, no. Supervisor Kim? Kim, no. Supervisor Peskin?
No.
Peskin, no. Supervisor Ronan?
No.
Ronan, no. Supervisor Safai?
No.
Safai, no. There are 3 ayes and 8 noes with Supervisors Yee, Breed, Cohen, Fewer, Kim, Peskin, Ronan, and Safai in the dissent.
The ordinance fails. Madam Clerk, please call the next items, item 8 through 10 together.
Items 8 through 10 are 3 resolutions that authorize the Fire Department to accept and expend grants from the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Item 8 is in the approximate amount of $61,000 to purchase a rapid deployment dock for the grant period of September 1st, 2016 through August 31st, 2019. Item 9 is a grant in the amount of approximately $770,000 to purchase a dive boat for the grant period of September 1st, 2015 to August 31st, 2018. And item 10 is a grant in the amount of approximately $135,000 to purchase equipment for its fire investigations unit for the grant term of July 29th, 2016 through July 28th, 2017.
Roll call vote.
On items 8 through 10, Supervisor Sheehy.
Aye.
Sheehy, aye. Supervisor Tang?
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Yee?
Aye.
Yee, aye. Supervisor Breed?
Aye.
Breed, aye. Supervisor Cohen?
Aye.
Cohen, aye. Supervisor Farrell?
Aye.
Farrell, aye. Supervisor Fewer?
Aye.
Fewer, aye. Supervisor Kim? Kim, aye. Supervisor Peskin?
Aye.
Peskin, aye. Supervisor Ronan?
Aye.
Ronan, aye. Supervisor Safai?
Aye.
Safai, aye. There are 11 ayes.
The resolutions are adopted unanimously. Madam Clerk, calls items 11 and 12 together, please.
Items 11 and 12 are 2 resolutions that authorize the Police Department to accept 2 separate gifts of furniture from Galindo Installation and Moving Services for use at district stations and facilities throughout the Police Department. For item 11, a gift of furniture valued at approximately $208,000, and for item 12, a gift of furniture valued at approximately $18,700.
Okay, colleagues, can we take these items, same house, same call? Without objection, the resolutions are adopted unanimously. Next item.
Item 13 is an ordinance to amend the administrative code to revise the residential unit conversion ordinance to require hosting platforms to exercise reasonable care in verifying that a residential unit is on the city registry prior to accepting a fee for booking a short-term rental transaction, and to affirm this equa determination.
Same house, same call?
No. Motion to recuse Supervisor Farrell.
Who made that motion?
Peskin.
Okay, Supervisor Peskin has made a motion to excuse Supervisor Farrell. Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Yee. Colleagues, can we take that without objection? Without objection, Supervisor Farrell is excused. Madam Clerk, on the item, please call the roll.
On item 13, Supervisor Sheehy.
Aye.
Sheehy, aye. Supervisor Tang.
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Yee.
Aye.
Yee, aye. Supervisor Breed.
Aye.
Breed, aye. Supervisor Cohen.
Aye.
Cohen, aye. Supervisor Fewer.
Aye.
Fewer, aye. Supervisor Kim. Kim, aye. Supervisor Peskin.
Aye.
Peskin, aye. Supervisor Ronan.
Aye.
Ronan, aye. Supervisor Safai.
Aye.
Safai, aye. There are 10 ayes.
The ordinance is passed unanimously on the first reading. Please call item 14 and 15 together.
Items 14 and 15 are 2 resolutions to receive and approve the annual report for item 14 for the Noe Valley Community Benefit District for fiscal years 2015 through 16, and for item 15 for the Ocean Avenue Community Benefit District for fiscal year 2015 through 2016, both submitted as required by the Property and Business Improvement District Law of 1994.
Roll call vote.
On items 14 and 15, Supervisor Sheehy.
Aye.
Sheehy, aye. Supervisor Tang.
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Yee.
Aye.
Yee, aye. Supervisor Breed.
Aye.
Breed, aye. Supervisor Cohen.
Aye.
Cohen, aye. Supervisor Farrell.
Aye.
Farrell, aye. Supervisor Fewer.
Aye.
Fewer, aye. Supervisor Kim. Kim, aye. Supervisor Peskin.
Aye.
Peskin, aye. Supervisor Ronan.
Aye.
Ronan, aye. Supervisor Safai.
Aye.
Safai, aye. There are 11 ayes.
The resolutions are adopted unanimously. Next item, please.
To the committee reports, items...
We're on item 16, Madam Clerk.
My apologies, Madam President. Item 16 is a resolution to urge the California State Legislature to amend the Revenue and Taxation Code to enable local California jurisdictions to levy personal and corporate income taxes, which the city could utilize as a sustained source of funding for transportation and public health priorities.
Supervisor Peskin.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to thank our Assembly Member Phil Ting for introducing Assembly Bill 1007. Assembly Member Ting would like to actually narrow the legislation to be for the city of San Francisco only. I have passed about to all of you and the clerk amendments that reflect that on pages 1, 2, and 3, and adds an additional whereas clause that reads, whereas the state legislature has expressed concerns about the potential for the federal government to lower the federal income tax, particularly for high-wage earners, which will only further exacerbate our growing income inequality in California, and I would make a motion to adopt those amendments.
Supervisor Peskin has made a motion to amend, seconded by Supervisor Ronan. Colleagues, can we take the amendments without objection? Without objection, the amendments pass. And seeing no other names on the roster on the item, Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
On item 16 as amended, Supervisor Sheehy.
Aye.
Sheehy, aye. Supervisor Tang.
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Yee.
Aye.
Yee, aye. Supervisor Breed.
No.
Breed, no. Supervisor Cohen.
Aye.
Cohen, aye. Supervisor Farrell.
No.
Farrell, no. Supervisor Fewer.
Aye.
Fewer, aye. Supervisor Kim. Kim, aye. Supervisor Peskin.
Aye.
Peskin, aye. Supervisor Ronan.
Aye.
Ronan, aye. Supervisor Safai.
Aye.
Safai, aye. There are 9 ayes and 2 noes with Supervisors Breed and Farrell in the dissent.
The resolution is adopted. All right, Madam Clerk, let's go to committee reports.
Items 21 through 23 were considered by the Budget and Finance Subcommittee at a regular meeting on Monday, March 16th, and were forwarded as committee reports. Item 21 was recommended as amended with a new title. It is a resolution that approves a purchase and sale agreement by the city with Prosperity 2 LLC for the sale of city-owned properties located at 1660 Mission Street and 1680 Mission Street for $52 million, including a city leaseback at an annual rent expense of approximately $3.4 million with yearly increases.
Madam Clerk, please call item number 22 as well.
Item 22 is a resolution that approves a purchase and sale agreement by the city with Lend-Lease Development, Inc. for the sale of city-owned property located at 30 Van Ness Avenue for $70 million, includes a city leaseback at an annual rent expense of $4.5 million with yearly increases, and to affirm the CEQA determination for both items 21 and 22.
Supervisor Kim.
Thank you, President Breed. Colleagues, we have been discussing the site of 30 Van Ness, one of our city-owned properties, for a little bit over the last 3 years. Its sale and acquisition, the price which we would like to gain from that site, the revenue of which would be used to construct 1500 Mission Street, a much-needed large city office building, which would house several of our city departments, taking the city off of our wildly swinging commercial rental market and hopefully saving taxpayer dollars in the future. And also the debate of what we should be building on the site of 30 Van Ness after the sale, given the fact that this is currently publicly owned land. In December of 2015, the city proposed a deal selling the site of 30 Van Ness at a price tag of $80 million with a 50% affordable housing on-site commitment. Several members of this board, including myself, expressed discontent or dissatisfaction with the balance of the deal. Just 1 month prior to the introduction, voters passed Proposition K, which urged the city to build no less than 33% affordable housing on publicly owned land. That month in December, Supervisor Peskin and I also introduced what would later become known as Proposition C, which would raise the inclusionary requirement of private market rate developers from 12% affordable housing to 25% affordable and middle income housing. This measure was overwhelmingly passed by the voters the following June of 2016. We knew that the city could do better on our affordable housing commitment on land which we own, a commitment which we made to the voters, and setting an example for the private market, while balancing our need for raising revenue for a much-needed new office building. The deal before us today, at a discount of $10 million, raises enough revenue for the construction of a new office building at 1500 Mission, combined with the sales of 1660 and 1680 Mission. And on top of that, the city will win an additional 40 to 60 new middle-income housing units that were not introduced in the deal prior, at a subsidized rate of roughly $250,000 a unit. That is a huge sale for anyone that is familiar with the development of housing. It costs much more than that to build a unit of housing here in San Francisco. With this deal, we have achieved Proposition C goals of 25% on-site affordable and middle-income housing without any upzoning. Now, with the consideration of upzoning of 100 feet, the developers committed to additional funds on top of their affordable housing contributions via the Market Octavia plan and the Van Ness Special Use District to hit 33% affordable housing, with the final 8% being contributed through an affordable housing fee. My commitment in working on this deal with the Department of Real Estate and the City of San Francisco was to ensure that we were both maximizing affordable and middle-income housing on a publicly owned site, while keeping our commitment to the voters of Proposition K, while also making sure that we are maximizing revenue that we could gain from the site to help build 1500 Mission. Again, another important city priority, as it potentially saves taxpayer dollars from expensive office leases, which this board painfully votes on and pays to the private market. Right now, here at the Board of Supervisors, we are talking a lot about the need to build middle-income housing. And unlike the deal that came before us in December 2015, which included 0 units of middle-income housing, unless the city was willing to buy those units back at $641,227 per unit, which I really took issue to a year and a half ago. This deal includes, without, again, any city upzoning, an additional 40 to 60 middle-income units. For example, for a family of 4, with a combined salary of a little over $100,000. That's 2 working teachers and 2 children with a starting salary of $48,000. Inclusionary housing is one of our most effective tools in building affordable housing and now middle-income housing. And as we have rising concerns about our federal government and potential budget shortfalls, focusing on developer-created housing may be one of the most certain ways that we will ensure that this type of housing gets built. I just want to recognize and thank John Updike and John Gavin from the Department of Real Estate, who really toiled or labored over making sure that we were balancing multiple important city goals, affordable housing and raising revenue for office building for the city. And I also want to recognize our project sponsor, Lend-Lease. I believe this is their first project in the city of San Francisco, for not only committing to 25% affordable housing in Proposition C off the bat without any upzoning, but also brainstorming with our office over the last month to come up with a way that we could actually achieve 33% affordable housing with some upzoning. Colleagues, I do ask for your support on item 22, of which I am a sponsor. While I'm not a co-sponsor of item number 21, I am also in support of that measure as well. I don't know how many times we have groaned when an expensive office lease comes to the Board of Supervisors for one of our city departments. It is really important that the city owns our own office space and that we build that. And I think that 1500 Mission is a good project and is one that we should be ensuring that we support city revenues for.
Thank you, Supervisor Kim. Supervisor Safai.
Thank you, Supervisor Kim, everyone that's been involved in this. Maybe I'm missing something in this conversation because, first of all, we own 1660 and 1680 free and clear. Those buildings are owned outright. There's no debt on those buildings. They're occupied by city agencies. And as part of this deal, as I dug into it, we will have a 107% increase in rent over the next 3 years in both buildings. And then on 30 Van Ness, we'll have a significant increase as well. So when I read the report from the budget and legislative analysts, it said to me that there was an additional $14 million that would need to be identified to remain in existing buildings that we currently occupy, 2 of which we own. And there is no identified revenue source as of yet for where that money will come from. We just heard from the mayor today, and we read over the weekend, that the Community Development Block Grant Program is being proposed to be eliminated. Let that sink in. Every single agency, group, organization, people sitting in this audience, folks that were advocating for the delay and the continuance on the Mission Street project because of issues of gentrification and otherwise, we will have no say ultimately with a Republican-led Congress and a Republican president. Those programs will most likely be eliminated. We own 2 buildings currently, and we're being asked to sell those 2 buildings to put into a deal that is predominantly being funded by certificates of participation. So I would like to hear from our controller and potentially our Department of Real Estate. Has there been investigation into whether or not we can do this deal, what the cost would be to do this deal on certificates of participation? Are there other city assets that we might be able to put into? Because just 2 weeks ago, we had HSA come in here and say we had to, because we had no other option, sign a lease with a building that is owned but then managed by a private company to pay millions of extra dollars because they don't have space. We own these 2 buildings free and clear. I understand that it will take something to upgrade those properties. So that's one. That's 1680 and 1660. On 30 Van Ness, let's be clear. This is a purchase and sale agreement. If everything that Supervisor Kim said was right, and we could 100% say that that was going to happen, maybe I would feel more comfortable. But there is nothing, let's be clear on that, there is nothing in this deal that says they have to build any housing. If you look at the report, the highest and best use for this site is an office building. They could keep this as an office building. They might come back to us and say, interest rates have risen. Investors are not investing. We cannot build. We can't build this project anymore. So now you no longer own the building, and you're going to continue to pay us rent for however long we need, because we don't have any other space to put those buildings at 30 Van Ness or 1660 and 1680. And the proposed buyers of 1660 and 1680 have said all they're going to do is keep that as office buildings. So $14 million that we haven't identified to pay rent in buildings we currently occupy from departments that we need additional services from. 2 of those buildings, colleagues, are occupied by the Department of Public Works. Every single one of us sitting here relies on those services, and their money goes down almost every single year. As I said at our Transportation Authority meeting last week, they've already said to us they're going to see a $15 million hit on street resurfacing. That's just street resurfacing. That's not even the entirety of their budget hit. So now let's get back to 30 Van Ness. That is one of the most valuable assets we have in our city portfolio. That site can go up to 520 feet. We have a crisis in homelessness. We have a crisis when it comes to, specifically within that homelessness crisis, family housing crisis, family homelessness crisis. Why are we only doing 25% affordable at that site? I hear people come in from every single one of our districts come in and say, and members are still sitting in the audience, why are we not doing 100% affordable? Why are we not doing 100% affordable at this site? We own this site. So there's smarter people in this room than me when it comes to financing. I'd like to hear, has there been a full analysis done? Can we do 1500 Mission Street using certificates of participation or other financing sources? Where's the money going to come from to pay the additional rent on the leaseback options that they have for 3 years with 2-year extensions? Then after those 2 years, they go market rate. So we have to worry about having to go market rate those last 2 years in those buildings that we currently occupy. And at the end of the day, can we affirm that there is nothing in this deal that says they have to build anything on 30 Van Ness, that they could sit on that and keep it as an office building? And lastly, I would say there's a reason this body passed Administrative Code 23A. Yes, these might not be surplus properties because they're currently occupied, but at the end of the day, this asset at 30 Van Ness has the potential to be a phenomenal opportunity to address many issues when it comes to family homelessness, affordable housing, homelessness for a lot of different entities that we've talked about in this body over the course of the last few months. And if we can float $400 million in debt for an office building, why aren't we thinking about floating debt to do family housing and address this crisis in homelessness? So I'd like to hear from the controller, maybe the budget and legislative analysts, and the Department of Real Estate.
You want to start with whom?
Controller, please.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Ben Rosenfield, Controller. I can take one of the questions, Supervisor, that you've asked here, and then I'll defer to the Department of Real Estate really to talk through details regarding the specific transaction and some of your other questions. The question as to what would happen if the city did not sell the facilities and apply those proceeds into the construction of this new tower, if we used a greater amount of debt or of COPs to finance that, how would that change the fundamentals of the project?
And has an analysis been done on that? Have we been provided with an analysis of that? Because when I talked to the Department of Real Estate, they said that had not been done and we had not been provided with that information.
It's a question that I heard yesterday for the first time, and so we've done some very initial work on this, so I can talk you through those, but then we can also talk about what that doesn't include. Overall, the building that's before you to construct at 1500 Mission Street is approximately a $350 million project. The way the project's in front of you, it's about $95 million of that would be paid for with cash, and the remainder of about $260 million would be financed with COPs. So the real question that I hear financially is if we took the sales proceeds out of the project, and because we wanted to retain those properties as city-owned and instead borrow the full $350, how would that change some of the math? Of course, cash in a deal like this is helpful financially because we don't have to pay interest over time and we're not paying borrowing costs, so it does change the math. The cost per square foot of the facility at occupancy, the first year of occupancy in the base project that we've estimated is about $60 a square foot. That's the fully loaded cost of the city facility that's being discussed here as proposed. If you're borrowing for the full amount and then paying back a larger amount of debt service over time in the form of higher rents, it increases that rental cost by about 23%. So
let me interrupt you for 1 second. Let me ask a different question because I heard. What if has it been looked at if, for instance, you did float the certificates of participation? Are there any penalties for paying those back early?
We always have call provisions in our certificates of participation or any other provision which allows us effectively to refinance them. Usually that's at year 10.
Right. So we could hypothetically retain ownership over those existing properties, not have to do the leaseback provision, sell them once you did the certificates of participation and built 1,500, and then once you built it, then you sell the buildings and pay them down. You could do it that way, couldn't you?
That would be a way you could approach the project. A couple of ththings might argue against that just financially. One, we're at a historically low interest rate environment at the moment, and so looking ahead into the future, we're probably going to be we would be locking in a lower interest rate now on it.
But your projections are based on 5.25, right? They're not based on today's numbers. You base them on worst case scenario. So you've already taken into that increase, correct?
I don't think we're taking into case the worst case scenario. We're looking at current markets, then we are adding about 100 basis points of spread because of uncertainty regarding what's going to go on with the interest rate environment over time. Mm-hmm. But you're right. You could take that approach. I guess the risk would be that we would have issued bonds And the question would be, will you have proceeds in the future to repay them? If not, we would be stuck with a debt service payment and that higher rental cost that I mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
It is a choice for the board.
So hypothetically, you could do that and then sell the buildings at a later date once the building's built and then pay down some debt.
That would be an approach you could take. You're just taking a different kind of financial risk. Until the time that you sold the buildings, the tenants in the building would be paying a higher market rent. So the Department of Building Inspection, Planning, and others would be paying rent that would be about 23% higher than if you apply the proceeds to the project. And you would be, or the city would be counting later on being able to redeem bonds at an unknown sales price in the future. So you could do that. But that's effectively how this changes the project finances. That less equity into the project means the per square foot rental cost is higher. And overall, over the life of the bonds, debt service costs are higher, of course. It increases the total debt service increase over the life because you are borrowing more would come to about $177 million in additional payments over the 30-year period.
That's if you didn't sell the buildings after year 5 or 3,
Correct.
right? Okay, so it wouldn't necessarily. So what I'm saying is that we haven't done that analysis fully.
We can run analysis other ways. I know the real estate department has taken a look at this in a number of different ways. They can probably speak better to some of the specific.
But you haven't done the specific analysis on selling the buildings after a few years and paying down the debt, not doing it just 100% certificates of participation over 30 years.
We can look at that question. It's really going to fundamentally be the numbers that I just talked through, and the place where we'll probably be having to estimate the most significantly will be what will the market for these buildings be like in 5 years or 10 years when you try to sell them. Will it be higher than today or lower than today? The buildings are aging. The value of the assets are likely to decline over time, and we probably are near the peak of asset value at the moment. But those are estimates about what might happen in the future.
Supervisor Safai, if I can interrupt for a minute, do you think, in light of what we know, and I know there's going to be a budget hearing at the Budget Select Committee on Thursday to talk about what's going to happen around federal cuts and what we're dealing with here in San Francisco? I mean, we are going to have to make some major changes in our budget. Do you think that as the controller, as a person who looks at our financial figures, whether it's our debt or our projections or whatever you want to call it, do you think that it is wise to continue, in some instances, with a project like this, for example, a business as usual, try to get this project done in light of what we could anticipate with our financial status here in San Francisco? I mean, what are your thoughts around that? As it relates to this particular project, is this responsible to do?
I mean, I think fundamentally those are your choices in front of this board. I think this would be a responsible choice to move ahead with, yes. The tenants in the building we're talking about here are predominantly non-general fund tenants. So we're talking about the Department of Building Inspection, City Planning, which is 90% fee supported, and these parts of the Department of Public Works are not general fund dependent, unlike the street resurfacing and some of the other parts of the department. So costs here or savings here fundamentally aren't going to be borne by the same parts of the city budget that are likely to be the most exposed to federal cuts. I understand the issue, but I think they are out of separate pots of money, and that would give me some solace. Fundamentally, this ends up being a choice about, do we want to own real estate in the Civic Center and make a very long play for long-term savings? Or do we want to remain more exposed in both good ways and bad to the lease rental market in the city?
If I might,
Supervisor Safi.
I don't know if it's that's what I'm saying, Mr. Controller. I don't know if it's actually those two choices, and I'm not necessarily proposing that. I think that there might be a scenario, and that's what I was hoping that you and maybe John. Is John Updike here? Oh, hey, John. Maybe you can come up and speak too. That there might be a scenario, have you looked at that certificates of participation, holding on to the property, selling them at a later date, and then we might be able to build that building and have those properties without this significant increase. There's going to be an increase, but not 107% increase, right? So that it might be a cost savings to the taxpayers, also to those departments, and at the same time achieve all the goals. We haven't even gotten into the 30 Van Ness conversation. This is simply about 1660 and 1680.
I think the shortest answer to your question is that's not analysis we've prepared,
Right.
but we certainly could.
Okay, thank you. That's what I wanted. John, can you speak to that a little bit?
Of course, Supervisor Safai, John Updike, Director of Real Estate. So to expand a little on what the controller was talking about relative to risk, from my perspective and looking at the real estate market, I think that's a very important point to be noted, that we are sort of scraping along this plateau of a peak of the real estate market, and I really can't speak to what that market might look like in 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now. Yes, it could be higher, but it also could be lower. And so we are maximizing and monetizing these 3 assets in the 2 on Mission and 30 Van Ness at a great time in the market to do so. As an example, we first appraised 30 Van Ness just 4 years ago, and it appraised at $40-some million. So that's an indicator of the volatility of the market. And again, it could go up further, it could go down. I can't speak to that. But I think we all acknowledge this market is nearing its peak if it hasn't already hit its peak. Right. So I want to speak to that. The second issue is relative to remaining at these locations. There's a deferral of significant capital expenditure here by selling these assets. None of them perform particularly well seismically. All are functionally obsolescent. They do not meet the needs of the occupant departments. And I think
Can I just ask you a question on that? Sure. So the person that's paying $52 million for these, what would their response be for 1660? You're saying that they're obsolete. They need all. So what is their plan? Because when I read in this document, it says that they're going to essentially keep them as office buildings. So they're going to pay $50 million and spend how much, in your opinion? I would imagine they're not going to spend that much.
It's a fair question as to what their intent is, and that really isn't part of our agreement. But speaking to the brokerage firms that looked at the properties, they all estimated a significant capital investment would be made by any buyer on the order of tens of millions of dollars, and likely a reskinning of both buildings, perhaps an adjoining of the 2 buildings. You may recall that 1660 and 1680 Mission are divided by a parking lot. And in fact, the city looked at constructing an improvement in between to wed the 2 buildings and perhaps look at retaining DBI at that location, which was deemed infeasible for a number of reasons. We could never achieve the square footage that we need on a per floor basis. Secondly, it was north of $100 million for a public works project to wed the 2 and use them to our advantage. Okay. So I think the upside is, again, buyers looking at the market dynamics, the continuing need for office space, the fact that these assets are not subject to Prop M allocation gives us great value at this time. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I think we're seeing the relatively
right. And Prop M, just for everyone's edification, is office space.
That is correct.
So that kind of goes to my second point on 30 Van Ness, which is, as I understand when I'm reading this report, this is a purchase and sale agreement. This does not obligate in any way the purchaser to build housing on this site. Is that correct?
That is correct, Supervisor. It is a purchase and sale agreement. It is not a development agreement because we do not have CEQA approval for a project on the parcel.
And then
may I add, though, that it does mandate that if redevelopment were to occur, certain requirements relative to affordable housing are mandated in the deed as a restriction against title, against this developer or any subsequent owner of the property.
Right. And then the other thing is there's nothing in this purchase and sale. There is a deed restriction in terms of the affordability if they were about to, but there's nothing that requires them to actually build the housing on site. They could fee out on everything. Is that correct? I know they can fee out on the additional to get to 33%, but they could fee out on the proposed, in this purchase and sale agreement, they could fee out on the entirety of it?
Yes, again, consistent with the current proposition, right. Yes.
So I guess what I would leave with colleagues is I think that based on the questions that I had here today, based on the unanswered questions on the source of rent that these departments would be required to pay, it most likely would come out of our general fund. Also, the analysis of doing this deal, 1,500 Mission, in terms of certificates of participation, holding on to the properties and selling them at a later date. I would ask for there to be a continuance on this item to give further study so that we can have further information to make an informed decision, because I'm not comfortable supporting this today. At the end of the day, I think that if we do determine that we can do 1,500 Mission Street without the sale of these properties, I think that we need to take a stronger look at 30 Van Ness. Everyone in this room that supports helping to build housing to address our homelessness crisis, to address our affordability crisis, we have a wonderful and unprecedented opportunity in 30 Van Ness. There are not many city assets in our portfolio that can go up as high as 520 feet.
Thank you, Supervisor Safai. Supervisor Safai, are you making a motion to continue both items,
yes.
21 and 22?
I am.
Supervisor Safai has made a motion to continue both items. Is there a second? I will second that. And I wanted to ask clarity on, and maybe someone from the staff can answer, whether or not there is a source to do, once these properties are sold, where's the money going to come from to pay the rent, which is about close to $20 million for 3 years. Where's the money come from? Somebody.
Supervisors, Naomi Kelly, City Administrator. I think what the Controller had articulated is about the majority of the clients that would be going into 1,500 Mission, who are at 30 Van Ness, who are at 1660 Mission, who are at 1680 Mission, are primarily non-general fund departments. And so it would be coming from these non-general fund resources.
All of the money to pay.
Not all of it, but the majority of it.
Do you know where the money's going to come from the non-general fund department? Like, it's going to come from the general fund? I'm confused by that.
So DBI is a revenue-generating department, so their increases would be coming out of their revenues. Planning is a revenue-generating department; their increases would be coming out of their revenues. DPW is overhead, and most of it is the architects and the engineers, which is based off of the projects that they're working on, and so that is coming from primarily non-general fund sources.
Okay, so none of the money of the proposed $20 million to pay for the rent over the course of 3 years is going to come from any of the general fund? I
can't say that. The majority is not coming from the general fund. And I need help from the mayor's budget office. There you go.
And to be specific, President Breed, the number is 91% non-general fund, 9% general fund.
Okay, and then that would have to be approved by the Board of Supervisors in our upcoming budget, which we have not yet had a discussion about.
Subject to budget appropriation, which is why I believe articulated in the Budget and Legislative Analyst Report the cost during this fiscal year for the time of projected closing of May 1, 2017 until the end of this fiscal year, those costs are borne in my budget, and so we are covering that delta of a rental differential. So it is subject to next fiscal year's budget appropriation, and yes, that'll be a matter for the board to deal with.
Thank you. Supervisor Kim. Oh, I'm sorry. Supervisor Peskin hasn't had an opportunity.
I'll defer to Supervisor. I'll defer to Supervisor Kim.
Supervisor Kim.
Well, first of all, I want to thank Supervisor Safai. I think that he asked excellent questions about the two items that are before us today, and certainly, actually, many of these questions came up over the last 3 years. I think many of us questioned whether we needed to sell city-owned property in order to build a larger city-owned property, and whether it was wiser to keep some of these facilities because land is so valuable here in San Francisco. So I just want to thank you for that. After my own heart, making sure we're getting the best deal possible moving forward. I did want to bring up the project sponsor who I see here today to speak on the record about their commitments. I know that what is before us today is a sale and acquisition deal, not a DDA, where we could actually confirm an agreement. But I think it's really important that, when a developer does come in and speaks on the public record, making a commitment around affordable housing, I think that there are very severe consequences when a developer doesn't keep to them, uphold them, especially if they're going to do other developments here in San Francisco. So I was hoping that you could speak to the question about a commitment of 25% affordable housing and 33% with the fees with an upzoning, and also to address some of Supervisor Safi's questions around the developer's commitment to building residential on the site versus maintaining the office building, which is also actually incredibly valuable, as was articulated by DRE.
Great, thank you. Alexa Arena with Lend-Lease. So thanks for the opportunity to speak. Our intention in the way that we see the site, and just so you know a bit about Lend-Lease, we're a development company that is just getting our footings in and very excited to have our first project in San Francisco. We are a residential development company, and so we really look at this as an opportunity to rehab the base of the office building, which needs quite a bit of work, and build a residential building on top of that. And the idea would be, since the hub rezoning is not complete, which would bring the heights up to 500 feet, that during the several years that the city has the lease back option, we work with the planning department and get full entitlements for the residential building on top in order to move forward with the project. And obviously the commitment in the purchase and sale agreement is at the 25% on site. There isn't a fee out component to it. There's an ability to build 33% elsewhere, but there's no let me pay a check out. So I just want to clarify that a little bit, because I can see how that would be concerning if there was that ability. And then obviously we've worked together to find an ability to say, when that increase in zoning happens theoretically through the hub, how do we get to an increased fee amount that gets us to a total of 33% for the project. So that's our intent, and we're very cognizant that there's many planning processes and approval processes going forward, and that without CEQA we can't get too deterministic on what exactly that looks like, but certainly our intent going forward.
And I appreciate that clarification. One of the things that gives me some assurance is that you will have to come back to this board several times, as well as the Planning Commission. One with the affirmation, potentially, of the CEQA determination, and also if there is upzoning of the Market Hub, which I strongly support, and I agree with Supervisor Safai, we should absolutely be maximizing height and density to build as much market rate, middle class, and working class housing as possible. You will then have to come back to this board again in order to be able to build. Could you clarify, you had mentioned that there is an inability for the developer, in this case Lend-Lease, to fee out, that you only have two options, to build 25% offsite or to build the 33% offsite. Could you explain in further details why that is the case?
Yeah, and I don't have the document in front of me. Could probably try to get that, but the general limitations within the purchase and sale agreement required 25% on-site, consistent with Prop C, or 33% where we build that 33% affordable housing elsewhere in the city. But the ability to just pay a fee does not exist in the purchase and sale agreement.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Arena. I just want to make one further point. This deal really is a balance of many city priorities, which makes it a little bit more difficult and challenging than the average housing deal that our office would typically negotiate. And that is also our belief, that the city should own and construct office sites that we have site control over, and that that we aren't at the whims of the commercial market, which has actually been incredibly painful over the last couple of years, not just for our residents and business owners, but also the city as well. But I also want to address Supervisor Safi's other point, which is that I would love to build 100% affordable housing, or 100% housing at 550 feet or 600 feet for those that are formerly homeless. But there just isn't a case where we've ever been able to finance a 100% project like that. And recognizing that in these large projects that it is very difficult to achieve 100% affordable housing. In Proposition K, our public lands ballot measures that we put before the voters, we acknowledge that in larger deals that we would be achieving 33% affordabilities on those sites, and that in smaller projects that we would endeavor to hit 100%. But I don't know, and I know the Mayor's Office of Housing isn't here anymore to address that question. I don't know of a single project that the Mayor's Office of Housing has been able to fund where we've been able to build 600 units of affordable housing. That is the dream, and I would love to get there, and I really appreciate Supervisor Safai proposing that. I just think given the landscape that I have seen, I like to push the limits, but I don't like to push what is the impossible. And so in this case, I believe we are maximizing what we can do for the housing market, both affordable, middle class, and market rate unit, while we are generating revenue for a much-needed office building site.
So I had a point of clarification. I'm not certain, and I just need some clarity. I'm not certain that the option to not fee out is possible. That's number one. Number two, it's my understanding that you have to have land if you're going to build off-site within a certain proximity of the project, which most of the land, I'm not certain if there is an opportunity to do this off-site. And again, I know this is not a development agreement, and this is a longer conversation, but there are just a lot of uncertainties here, and I guess part of my concern is a lot of unanswered questions, but more importantly, I'm just really concerned that we are continuing with business as usual, and we still haven't approved the budget to pay for. I mean, there's just so many things always attached to many of the decisions that we make, but we're going to have some tough decisions ahead of us as it relates to our budget, and how are we going to deal with a situation like this? I mean, in fact, if God forbid we have to cut city staff and cut departments and start trimming down departments, and they've already been given orders to start cutting back on their budget, then are we really going to have enough people to fill these proposed office spaces that we're looking at? I mean, I just think a bigger conversation needs to happen as it relates to our overall budget, and also as it relates to the possibilities of the affordable housing and what makes sense. And so that's the reason why I get that, these are sell agreements, and the decisions are they've been in the works for a long time. They've been rejected by this body before and brought back in a different way, but it's still, I still feel a little uneasy about some of the missing details of this agreement. Supervisor Peskin.
Thank you, Madam President. I wanted to put this in a little bit of historical context for those of you who were around on December the 8th of 2015, which was my first board meeting in 7 years, wherein we actually rejected the sale that was before us at that time with trepidation, because relative to historical context, I said at that meeting that we should have bought the AAA site when we could have it for $80 million, and at the end of the day, the city got cold feet, and had we done that, we would have been out of being captive to the office rental market many, many years ago. So I appreciate what Supervisor Safai is saying. I actually came to this party with a slightly different perspective from Supervisor Kim. I was actually, in this particular instance, less interested in housing affordability and more interested in getting out of the office rental market as the city, and that was what was actually driving me. In the end, we actually ended up with more affordable housing, and we will still finally get out of the rental market for all of our office workers that work for the city. I think it is the best deal that we could hope for. I concur with Mr. Updike and appreciate his work on these very complex sales, that this is probably the top of the market, and While we all agreed to delay the 2675 Folsom matter, I think that in this matter, delay is not our friend, and I respectfully will be voting against the continuance.
Thank you, Supervisor Peskin. Supervisor Safai.
Yeah, I just want to say, again, I wasn't talking about building 600 units at 30 Van Ness. But what I was saying is that there is a phenomenal opportunity. And I'm not exactly sure if we've actually dug in deep to look at all the potential avenues that we could approach this site. I mean, we have, John, Director Updike, do we have any other assets in our portfolio that have a height of 520 feet, potentially? Are there any other city-owned properties that we could do 500 feet?
And if I may, through the President.
Supervisor Peskin.
I have for years been championing building housing above Station 13, the downtown two-story fire station. We could build literally dozens of floors of housing above that site that we own.
Thank you for that. Yes, Director Updike.
Thank you, Supervisor Peskin. You stole the words right out of my mouth. Yes, those are probably other opportunities.
Those are the only
particularly our Sansom Fire Station, which we are looking at, in fact.
Okay.
But to your point, Supervisor Safai, these opportunities are rare. Just to be clear, the current entitlement is 400 feet.
Right, 400 feet with
site.
the ability to upzone to 520. So my point is, and I want to really underscore that in this situation, we're going to continue to have these conversations with this body over the next 3 years. We're going to have people come in during this conversation from the Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing. We have a crisis, as everyone knows. We have the ability and the mandate to build at least 1,000 units to end family homelessness in this city. And my point is, we have this asset, maybe not 600 units, but I look at this similar to the Balboa Reservoir in Supervisor Yee's district. We have a phenomenal opportunity that we could take a very, very creative approach and do something trend-setting that would address some of these crises that we have. That's one. The second thing is that I still think that we need to have further analysis to determine if we can approach what Supervisor Peskin's talking about, is to get out of the rental market for office space. So I'm not fully convinced that we can't do both. And that's why I'm asking for a continuance to allow further analysis of the idea of approaching this deal with certificates of participation, potentially selling the buildings at a later date so that our rents aren't increasing significantly, and then having another look at 30 Van Ness. That's really what I'm asking for today.
Thank you, Supervisor Safai. Supervisor Kim.
Thank you. I want to address the question of, existing land that's available for the production of affordable housing. And actually, there are two sites, both 101 Hyde and 180 Jones, which, while the majority of the financing came from the private market rate developers that bought the land for the city and then deeded it to the Mayor's Office of Housing, there is still gap financing. When we talked about the final 8% of fees coming out of 30 Van Ness, I had talked about those fees potentially going towards the gap financing for 101 Hyde and 180 Jones. And for 180 Jones, at least, the community is hoping that what will be built on the site will be step-up housing for current single-room occupancy residents, many of whom, even if they have an ability to pay a consistent small amount of rent, are unable to get into better types of housing, thereby freeing SRO rooms for those that are homeless on our streets currently. 101 Hyde has not been set yet. It could be housing for the formerly homeless. It could be housing for, working class families. We're still looking into that, but all to say that there is land within our site control that we do need to raise revenue for to build additional affordable housing. Colleagues, I won't be supporting the continuance today, although I really appreciate Supervisor Safai's comments and questions. I think they are quite good. It's just that we really have hashed out many of these over discussions at the Board of Supervisors over the last 3 years. And I think that, the deal isn't everything that I want it to be, but I really do think it's the best balance in consideration of all the different goals that the city has, and in looking at a number of ways to finance the construction of 1500 Van Ness. So, colleagues, I just ask for your support of these two items today.
Thank you, Supervisor Kim. And seeing no other names on the roster, on the motion to continue, Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Madam President, I will need to know a date that Supervisor Safai is suggesting to continue to.
Supervisor Safai?
Can I ask the controller how much time he think he would need to do a little bit of the analysis that we talked about?
We could complete a preliminary analysis in probably 1 to 2 weeks, Supervisor. A more detailed one would take more time.
So that would be, okay, 2 weeks seems to be fine. That's what I'm proposing.
So the meeting of April 4th?
Yes.
So, Mr. Updike?
Thank you, President Breed. The only issue to note is due to the debt on 30 Van Ness, there are some pretty strict timelines relative to notification and defeasance of that debt. And we have a closing date proposed in both transactions, which if April 4 was the date that the board approved the transaction, I'm not sure we could meet our closing date. We may have to renegotiate the agreements, and a reopener could reopen a number of issues. So I just want to express that there is some risk associated with that delay.
Thank you. And since we don't have another board meeting, that's the next board meeting, so that would probably be our only option. Any other questions? No other names on the roster. On the motion to continue, Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Supervisor Sheehy?
No.
Sheehy, no. Supervisor Tang?
No.
Tang, no. Supervisor Yee?
No.
Yee, no. Supervisor Breed?
Aye.
Breed, aye. Supervisor Cohen?
No.
Cohen, no. Supervisor Farrell? No. Farrell, no. Supervisor Fewer?
No.
Fewer, no. Supervisor Kim?
No.
Kim, no. Supervisor Peskin?
No.
Peskin, no. Supervisor Ronan?
No.
Ronan, no. Supervisor Safai?
Aye.
Safai, aye. There are 2 ayes and 9 noes with Supervisor Sheehy, Tang, Yee, Cohen, Farrell, Fewer, Kim, Peskin, and Ronan in the dissent.
The continuance fails. And seeing no names on the roster, Madam Clerk, on the item, please call the roll.
On items 21 and 22, Supervisor Sheehy.
Yes.
Sheehy, aye. Supervisor Tang?
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Yee?
Aye.
Yee, aye. Supervisor Breed?
No.
Breed, no. Supervisor Cohen?
Aye.
Cohen, aye. Supervisor Farrell? Farrell, aye. Supervisor Fewer?
Yes.
Fewer, aye. Supervisor Kim?
Aye.
Kim, aye. Supervisor Peskin?
Aye.
Peskin, aye. Supervisor Ronan?
Aye.
Ronan, aye. Supervisor Safai?
No.
Safai, no. There are 9 ayes and 2 noes with Supervisors Breed and Safai in the dissent.
Those resolutions are adopted. Supervisor Sheehy.
I'd like to rescind my vote on item 16.
So you'd like to rescind the vote on item number 16?
Yes.
Supervisor Sheehy has made a motion to rescind the vote on item number 16. Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Farrell. Colleagues, can we take that without objection? Without objection, the vote has been rescinded. Madam Clerk, on item number 16, please call the roll.
On item 16, Supervisor Sheehy?
No.
Sheehy, no. Supervisor Tang?
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Yee?
Aye.
Yee, aye. Supervisor Breed?
Aye.
Supervisor
Sorry,
Breed?
public.
No.
No.
Breed, no. Supervisor Cohen?
Aye.
Cohen, aye. Supervisor Farrell? Farrell, no. Supervisor Fewer?
Yes.
Fewer, aye. Supervisor Kim?
Aye.
Kim, aye. Supervisor Peskin?
Aye.
Peskin, aye. Supervisor Ronan?
Aye.
Ronan, aye. Supervisor Safai? Safai, aye. There are 8 ayes and 3 noes with Supervisors Sheehy, Breed, and Farrell in the dissent.
The resolution is adopted. All right, Madam Clerk, please go to the next item, item number 23.
Item 23 is a resolution to authorize the Recreation and Park Department to apply for a $7.5 million grant from the State of California Department of Housing and Community Development for the planning and development of various parks and community facilities in San Francisco.
Roll call vote.
On item 23, Supervisor Sheehy.
Aye.
Sheehy, aye. Supervisor Tang.
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Yee. Supervisor Yee? Yee, aye. Supervisor Breed?
Aye.
Breed, aye. Supervisor Cohen?
Aye.
Cohen, aye. Supervisor Farrell? Farrell, aye. Supervisor Fewer?
Aye.
Fewer, aye. Supervisor Kim? Kim, aye. Supervisor Peskin?
Aye.
Peskin, aye. Supervisor Ronan?
Aye.
Ronan, aye. Supervisor Safai?
Aye.
Safai, aye. There are 11 ayes.
The resolution is adopted unanimously. Next item, roll call for introduction.
Supervisor Sheehy is first supervisor to introduce new business.
Many people know my history using the contracting process to fight for equal benefits. Given our rising income inequality, I believe we can use the city's contract process to improve wages and help workers move closer to the middle class. Today, I am introducing an ordinance with Supervisor Kim that would raise wages for the lowest wage workers employed by city contracts. Today, the city's minimum compensation ordinance, or MCO, sets a wage rate of $13.64 on for-profit city contracts. This is known as the living wage. For a person working 40 hours a week, that comes to just $28,000 per year. This ordinance will restore the traditional delta between the minimum wage and the living wage, which has been on average a difference of $1.68. This year, on July 1st, the minimum wage rises to $14. This ordinance would set the living wage at $15.68, or $32,600 a year. In 2018, both would rise an additional $1. In addition, the minimum wage only covers workers in San Francisco, not people working for contractors outside of the city. At San Francisco International Airport, for example, many service workers will not receive a living wage unless we take action by July 1st. Raising wages for hundreds of the lowest income workers is just and fair. It also stimulates our economy because these workers spend the increased wages in our local community. The rest I submit.
Thank you, Supervisor Sheehy. Supervisor Tang?
I will submit.
Thank you. Supervisor Yee?
Thank you, Madam Clerk. First of all, I just want to make a quick announcement that I'm actually on my fourth year of this program where we have in our district, in District 7, participatory budgeting. And this year, again, we're joined with Supervisor Cohen and her district. So I just want to say that this year we'll have over $500,000 for our district to vote on in regards to projects. And we had a record number of projects that were submitted, or proposals. I think there were 46 in which we selected for the neighborhood council 21 proposals for our residents to vote on. So this voting just started on Friday, March 17th, and will go through March 31st. And that there are two ways for people to vote on these projects. One of them is in person if they feel like it. They could go to West Portal or Ingleside Libraries, or they could go to the Mariloma Elementary School to vote in person. I already heard that at West Portal Library on Saturday, the stack of the forms to vote were all gone on Saturday, and we had to redeliver on Monday. And thus far, just with only a few days of voting, we've already had 900, close to 1,000 people voting on our projects. So we're trying to break our record, our own record for the district. So I'm hopeful that it looks like we're going to way break it this year. The other thing I wanted to do was, by the way, for that, to vote online, go to sfpbd.sfgov.org/d7/vote to get online to vote. Okay. I would like to today honor a fellow native San Franciscan and a giant in the Chinese American community, Philip Choi. I'd like to close today's meeting in his memory. This is a man who is irreplaceable in the Chinese American community, and someone I've known personally for many, many decades now. And Philip passed away last Thursday at age of 90 after being diagnosed with cancer this year. But today I want to honor his far-reaching legacy and contributions to the Chinese American community. Philip was a teacher, author, and fierce civil rights advocate. Much of what we know today about the many important and long overlooked contributions of the Chinese Americans to our country's development we owe to Philip Choi's tireless efforts. Among his many accomplishments, together with him Mark Lai, he helped teach the first ever course in Chinese American history in the country at San Francisco State University in 1969. His course subsequently became the model for college programs throughout the country. Growing up during a time of wide discrimination against Asians, Philip Choi was not one to be easily intimidated. As a trained architect from UC Berkeley, working in a firm, he was discriminated against because of his race and told he would never get senior position. He subsequently established his own practice, which he ran until he retired in 2000. During the 1965 Transcontinental Railroad Centennial Celebration, he also challenged the organizers of the event when they failed to acknowledge the pivotal role the Chinese workers on the western half of the railroad, the Central Pacific, had. There was no acknowledgement that they existed. This section included the particularly difficult construction of the Sierra Nevada. Preserving Chinese American history was Phil's passion, and that he did. He played a major role in restoring and preserving the Angel Island Immigration Center. He was the president of the Chinese Historical Society in 1965 and for many years. He created an excellent video documentary series on Chinese American history for the public broadcasting called Gamsan Ha. And he wrote several books on Chinese American history and also served on state commissions and won many, many prizes. I personally am grateful for his work, which taught me so much about my own history. And he would be sorely missed in the Chinese American community. All the things he did in regards to the history, we forget that he was an architect, and that indeed he even had influence as an architect to play a role in keeping the history of the Chinese American alive. He had a big part in giving advice to creating the Chinese Historical Society a museum on Clay Street. And you think that it's only in San Francisco? I was driving up camping one year into the mountains and was coming down the mountains, and I saw a little sign that said museum, and so I went into this little town, and it was a Chinese museum in Orville, of all places. Mm-hmm. And I walk in there thinking, oh, what is this, And the person that was there told me the history of how it was developed. And he says, something, maybe you heard of this guy. He's from San Francisco, actually. The person that designed this museum that's keeping sort of a flavor of the Chinese was Philip Choi. So I could see that even in his architectural work, he had influence from that way past the boundaries of the Bay Area. So today, he is survived by his children, Stephanie, Randall, and Brian, and 6 grandchildren. So the rest I submit, and I think, Supervisor Peskin, would you want to say something too?
Sure. I would be honored to join in the in memoriam for Philip Choi. I think Supervisor Yee said it all. My wife was a huge fan of Philip Choi's back from the days that he served on the Landmarks Preservation Board. In addition to what Supervisor Yee said, he mentored generations of historic preservation professionals and activists, including Cindy Wu, and he will be sorely missed, and our regrets to his daughter Stephanie and sons Randall and Brian, and there will be an event in his memory in April at a date to be determined, and also our regrets to Sue Lee from the Chinese Historical Society of America.
Thank you, Supervisor Yee and Supervisor Peskin. President Breed. Supervisor Cohen.
Thank you. Submit.
Thank you. Supervisor Fewer.
Yes, thank you. Colleagues, today I'm calling for a hearing on the 2017 San Francisco Language Access Ordinance Annual Compliance Summary Report presented by the Office of Civic Engagement in Immigrant Affairs. The city's first language access ordinance was passed by the Board of Supervisors in 2001 with amendments made in 2009 and 2015 that led to the language access ordinance in place today. According to the report, 21.6% of San Francisco residents self-identify as limited English proficiency, with Chinese and Spanish being number 1 and 2 languages spoken among LAP residents. Other languages include Filipino, Vietnamese, and Russian. And in the Richmond District, residents with limited English proficiency comprised almost a fifth of our population, speaking predominantly Chinese, followed by Russian. With almost a quarter of San Francisco residents identifying as limited English proficiency, it is incumbent upon the city and county of San Francisco that the services we provide are accessible in the native languages spoken by our LEP constituents. City departments are interfacing with residents about registering to vote, bus schedules, planning and development in their neighborhoods, property taxes, and so much more. I have seen city departments conducting community outreach in my own neighborhood without providing interpretation or translation, and I have been disappointed. It is imperative that we are able to communicate clearly with residents regardless of language, and that they feel city services are accessible to them. And it is even more important that as a city, we see the language access ordinance not as a burden, but as part of our duty and our responsibility in serving the residents of San Francisco. I look forward to working with the Office of Civic Engagement and Immigrant Affairs and other key city departments and agencies on this hearing, and hope that it will inform our future discussion and any possible actions regarding language access. The rest I submit.
Thank you, Supervisor Fewer. Supervisor Kim.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I'm introducing a resolution today on supportive of single-payer health insurance resolution. Quote from the Physicians for a National Health Program: "Our current national healthcare system is simple. Don't get sick." Even with our current system of health coverage, commonly known as Obamacare and officially established as the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, many people are still left behind with no coverage or inadequate coverage. With Donald Trump signing on his very first day in office an executive order authorizing federal agencies to dismantle this federal healthcare system, it's been left to the states and to our own city to figure out how we can resist this administrative directive that makes it even more of a disaster to get sick in this country. I want to thank my colleague and co-sponsors, Supervisor Hillary Ronen, Sandra Fewer, Aaron Peskin, Norman Yee, and Malia Cohen for their co-sponsorship of our resolution to support Senate Bill 562, known as the Californians for a Healthy California Act, authored by Senator Ricardo Lara and Senator Tony Atkins. It is currently under consideration by the state legislature and would establish a comprehensive, universal, single-payer healthcare coverage program and a healthcare cost control system for the benefit of all residents of the state. For those that are unfamiliar with single-payer or universal healthcare, this is what it is. It is a system in which a single public or quasi-public agency organizes healthcare financing, but the delivery of the healthcare still remains largely in private hands. Under a single-payer system, all residents of the U.S. would be covered for all medically necessary services, including doctors, hospital visits, preventative and long-term care, mental health, reproductive health care, dental, vision, prescription drugs, and medical supply costs. This program would be funded by savings obtained from replacing today's inefficient and profit-oriented multiple insurance payer with a single system, with a single streamlined nonprofit public payer, and by modest new taxes based on ability to pay. We already pay enough for health care for all. We just don't get it. Americans have the highest health spending in the world, but we get less care than people in many other industrialized countries. Because we pay for health care through a patchwork of private insurance companies, about 1/3 of our health spending goes to administration. No more premiums, no more financial barriers to health care, such as copays and deductibles, no more financial disaster if you are unlucky enough to get sick. The majority of our country's doctors support national health insurance, according to an April 2008 national survey of internal medicine, with 59% supporting. And we can add our support today with the Board of Supervisors' voice, along with the California Nurses Association, 4 million Californians who are part of the Healthy California Grassroots Campaign, and over 150 organizations representing community, labor, immigrant rights, business, seniors, healthcare providers, and advocates in support of Senator Lara and Atkins Senate Bill 562. And the rest I submit.
Thank you, Supervisor Kim. Supervisor Peskin.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I am proud to co-sponsor Supervisor Ronen's Trump wall contract ban, which you'll hear a little bit more about if you did not read this morning's paper. I'm also introducing at the Board of Supervisors the same resolution urging the state legislature to require the PUC to allow us to gather data about transportation network companies, and I spoke to that at the TA meeting earlier today, so I will not belabor it here. And then in preparation for our next Millennium Tower hearing, given the revelations that were set forth in NBC Bay Area's coverage Monday a week ago, and given our efforts to contact Mr. Hardeep Panu, who is one of the peer reviewers at 301 Mission Street, I will be introducing yet, unfortunately, another request for a subpoena, as well as his testimony under penalty of perjury for a GAO meeting on Friday, April 28th. And then, in addition to joining Supervisor Yee for the in memoriam for Mr. Philip Choi, I would like to adjourn today's meeting in the memory of former City College Board President Natalie Berg as well. The rest I submit.
Thank you, Supervisor.
And Supervisor Peskin, can we do that on behalf of the entire board?
Absolutely.
Without objection, we will adjourn the meeting on behalf of Natalie Berg, on behalf of the entire board.
Thank you, Madam President. Supervisor Ronen.
Yes, today I have two items. The first, which Supervisor Peskin just referred to, today I stood in front of a company, T.Y. Lin International Group, to announce legislation that I'm introducing that would prevent the City and County of San Francisco from contracting with any business that bids or actually provides services or goods to build President Trump's wall along the border between Mexico and the United States. We stood in front of T.Y. Lin International because this company received millions of dollars in government contracts to help build the eastern span of the Bay Bridge and has expressed interest in potentially bidding on the wall. And we had a message for that company: stick to building bridges, not walls. By introducing, so we are a city that benefits every single day off the hard work and the engagement of immigrant residents in every facet of our community. And we are also a major player in the marketplace. By introducing this legislation, we are moving beyond symbolic protest and making it clear to companies interested in doing business with San Francisco that we expect those companies to uphold basic principles of compassion and dedication to human rights. These companies have a choice to make: build the wall or work with the City and County of San Francisco. At a time when the Trump administration is withdrawing investment from life-saving services like Meals on Wheels, health insurance for our poorest citizens, investments in affordable housing and our public education system, he's instead squandering billions of dollars on a border wall. That is his decision to make, but we can decide not to be complicit with that decision. I will close by saying that as a mother of a small child, if my daughter was ever in grave danger for her life, there is no wall that is large enough that I would not find a way to climb, and there is no trench that is too deep that I would not find a way to dig. Immigration is driven by parents seeking a better life and a safer life for their children. And as the richest and most powerful nation in the world, we should be setting the bar for how to treat the most vulnerable among us with compassion. I want to thank, again, Supervisor Peskin for being with me on this one from the get-go, and Supervisor Kim for her co-sponsorship. I also want to thank City Council Member Abel Guillen, who joined us today and is pursuing a similar law in Oakland, and Julie Vett and Lauren Curry from the City Attorney's Office, who worked extremely hard to get this legislation done on time. And then finally, colleagues, a very, very special thank you to Sheila Chung Hagan from my office. You might not know that this is the last board meeting that she's staffing, because we don't have a board meeting next week, sadly. Sheila started her career as a legislative aide in the City and County of San Francisco for Supervisor David Campos. And her first major fight was to ensure due process for immigrant youth. And I find it fitting that she's going out fighting for immigrants like she always has for decades, by working and being the main driver of this important piece of legislation. You'll hear more from me. I'm obviously devastated that she's leaving, but she did me the great favor of helping me transition from a legislative aide to a supervisor, and I will forever be grateful for that. But thank you so much, Sheila, for your tremendous work on this legislation. We will all be extremely grateful for it for many years to come. The second piece I have is a resolution in support of California Assembly Bill 523, the Electric Program Investment Charge, Equity and Clean Energy Investment, authored by Assemblymember Reyes. The California Public Utilities Commission created the Electric Program Investment Charge, otherwise known as EPIC, in December 2011 to allocate funds collected from investor-owned utilities for innovative projects in clean energy. The California Energy Commission is in charge of administering these funds. According to a December 2017 report from the California Energy Commission, individuals living in disadvantaged communities and low-income communities face significant barriers to fully participate in the state's clean energy programs. Out of 81 projects funded by EPIC in 2015, only 12 of those projects, or 14%, were programs reaching disadvantaged and low-income communities, which constitute 25% of the state. This bill will equitably allocate EPIC funds to communities that need it most. 25% of the funds in EPIC will go towards disadvantaged communities, and an additional 10% will go towards low-income communities, defined as below 80% of the statewide median income. Renewable energy spending, research, and programs are not reaching low-income and communities of color who are most impacted by negative fossil fuel energy production. It is critical that as a green economy develops, we include communities who not only have been overburdened by pollution, but also have the most to gain from the economic impacts of renewable industry. I want to thank both the community-based organization Poder and Natalie G. from my office for bringing this issue to my attention and working on this resolution. And I want to thank Supervisors Fewer and Peskin for co-sponsoring. The rest I submit.
Thank you, Supervisor Ronan. Supervisor Safai.
I don't have anything to introduce today, but I just wanted to wish everyone a happy Persian New Year. Today's the first day of spring, Eid Mubarak, Nowruz, Piruz, which means Happy New Year and prosperous New Year to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Safai. Madam President, that concludes the introduction of new business.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, please read public comment.
At this time, the public may now address the entire Board of Supervisors for up to 2 minutes on items within the subject matter jurisdiction of the Board, to include the minutes and items 26 and 27 on the adoption without reference to committee calendar. Public comment is not allowed when an item has been previously subject to public comment at a Board committee or at a public hearing at the Board meeting. Speakers using translation assistance will be allowed twice the amount of time to testify, and if you would like to display a document on the overhead projector, please clearly state such to SFG TV and then remove the document when the screen should return to live coverage of the meeting.
All right. Thank you. First speaker.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. My name is Sue Lee. I'm the Executive Director of the Chinese Historical Society of America, and I wanted to thank Supervisors Yi and Peskin for your kind words about Phil Choi. He was truly a pioneer, one of a kind, and without him and his efforts, there probably wouldn't be as much information about Chinese American history. You know, in 1963, when the Historical Society formed, people gathered at the National Mall to listen to Martin Luther King give his I Have a Dream speech. And the estimate of the crowd was 250,000. That number is bigger than the number of Chinese in America in 1963. All right? Today, we have more Chinese in San Francisco than there were on the National Mall. People in the National Mall. So just in the scope of 50 years, the demographics of the Chinese, the Asian population has really changed. And the work that Phil and Mark Lai did really illuminates our history and talks about our contributions to America. And just because resistance is a theme now, we think about Chinese resisting the Chinese Exclusion Act. We think of Chinese resisting and going to the courts and making sure that we have equal protection of the law, and that we have birthright citizenship. And that those are achievements that were not recognized, and so it's really important. So I just wanted to thank you for acknowledging Phil. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
My name is Nancy Cross, and I'm going to try to address an opportunity for Plan B in some of the crucial relations with the federal government. We read in the paper about the federals coming into courtrooms, state courtrooms, and we see that there's problems in keeping our people safe from attack by such indirect means. And I would like to propose that we could strengthen our hand by assuring that we are making the due process and fairness and standards of our society available to everybody, not only the Chinese and the Hispanics and all those that we think of high priority, but also the people who are low priority, namely the homeless single adults. And now, what I'm saying affects other people too, but we are judging people out of shelters by a process called arbitration, which is not arbitration in the usual legal sense, but it's a concoction that's made up by non-lawyers to get rid of people from shelters without due process. And we have opportunity to make due process in all the things we do, whether exiting the people in the library from use of it or exiting the people from shelters. And we need attention to the fairness of our hearings, administrative hearings that deny people important rights to them, whether they're priority people or not. And if we can demonstrate that we are respecting the standards that we want of the federal government in relation to people from other that originate in other countries.
Thank you, Ms. Cross. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Next speaker, please.
Patricia Voy, Marina Calholla Neighbors in Actions Planning Association to Divisadero, and Marina Calholla Neighbors and Merchants. I came here for several reasons. The first reason is that Marina Calholla has a great issue concerning the homeless. We're getting truckloads from San Rafael and from San Quentin delivered to us on a regular basis. We're trying to get the license plates in order to be able to handle the situation. We have a process with the police department, with the new homeless, that we try to get them help. We try to get them food. We try to get them housing. But we have a couple that are refusing everything. The one I'm going to talk about is older than I am. A little bit, looks like me a little bit from what I hear. And she's refused all help. As of today, she's been kicked out of 20 merchants. She comes in, she says, I want to use your bathroom. They say yes, and then she comes out and raises a stink. One of them, the super duper, told her she could come in during off hours between 9 and 12, and they would allow her to, go in. She, after a while, decided to come in during the other hours and slam doors in people's faces. Bank of America, she has destroyed the plants repeatedly. She sits right next to the Marina supermarket right now and plays, oh, I don't have any food. And then the people bring her the food, and as soon as they go around the corner, she goes into the supermarket and starts screaming, I'm diabetic and you have to return it and exchange it. This is a problem that we've had continuing.
Thank you.
Thank you. I will continue this later, every one of you. And also, Norman.
Next speaker, please.
To SFG TV, I would like the overhead to remain on the screen until I say clearly otherwise. So, we were talking about the ongoing fraud being perpetrated on the citizens of San Francisco by the Office of the Mayor. I'm sorry I missed the mayor earlier. From the findings of the FPPC, the Fair Political Practices Commission in Sacramento, respondent Luis Herrera, while serving as city librarian for the San Francisco Public Library, failed to report gifts received from the Friends of the San Francisco Public Library on annual statements of economic interest for calendar years 2009, 10, and 11 in violation of Government Code 87300. Mr. Herrera signed these statements with the following declaration: I certify under penalty of perjury under the laws of the state of California that the foregoing is true and correct. And if you look at the first column, you'll see his original statements were all zeros, and when he was required by the FPPC to refile, they went up to $5,000 a year. So a city department head appointed by the mayor perjured himself by lying a year after year after year about receiving gifts from a group he was responsible for providing overhead. And I'm now back to the point where if you have other things to do, why don't you go outside and do it? It's a little less rude than sitting there when the public comes. Almost $15,000 over these 3 years, and at that point it had become a custom for more than a decade. So I estimate from public records he's gotten about $90,000 from the Friends, and for 13 years never declared any of it legally. If a city employee did that, they would be fired. And next week we'll start talking about all the different orders of determination, the ones that...
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. Peter Warfield, Executive Director of Library Users Association. Today is Arts Day, San Francisco, and Arts Advocacy Day. And I, on a non-library matter, wanted to say that it appears that the administration of City College wants to close the Fort Mason campus, which also has a lot of older adult programs. They want to close it completely, presumably to save money. This is something they've concealed from the public and presumably even from the head of the Board of Trustees. The Board of Trustees of City College is meeting on Thursday, the 23rd of March at 4 o'clock in the multi-use building on the Phelan Ocean Avenue campus. The library's fine amnesty ended last month, and recently they sent their statistics out, most of which represented some considerable good news, but also, in the larger picture, it was what might be considered not a success, but a flop. More than 90% of some of their goals, if not all, failed. So, for example, they boasted about 10,000 patrons having their fines forgiven. What they didn't say was that 150,000 patrons, more than a third of the total current cardholders, owe 1 cent or more and consequently have restricted use of the library. They boasted that 5,000 patrons had their borrowing privileges restored. They didn't boast that that's less than 10% of the 55,000 whose borrowing is restricted. The whole thing covers a harsh and regressive fine.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, and I am Catherine Canton. I'm the organizer with Arts for a Better Bay Area, and I want to thank Supervisors Kim and Fewer for joining us earlier this afternoon outside for Arts Advocacy Day San Francisco. We are in coalition with the National Americans for the Arts Arts Advocacy Day, so we have dozens of arts leaders from across the country in DC, and I really just want to say that as an arts worker in San Francisco, having been born and raised in San Francisco, I ask you to support our arts. It really is about the way that we tie and weave together a strong social fabric, social and cultural fabric for this city. San Francisco is an expensive city to survive in, and our artists and arts organizations are struggling like so many other of our residents and workers. It's been difficult enough to not have the hotel tax funding for the arts, and what we're asking for is to support continuing to stabilize grants for the arts in San Francisco Arts Commission's budget. They do important work funding arts of all sizes, all disciplines, all shapes, and supporting the various communities of San Francisco and various populations, various residents. So now more than ever, we also need an additional funding of $2.5 million so that we can continue to build a strong social fabric for this city. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker, please.
Hello, my name is Andy Iannone, and I'm the Director of Education and Training at San Francisco Ballet. I'm a lifelong musician, arts lover, and arts consumer here in San Francisco. And in recognition of Arts Advocacy Day and in appreciation of the more than 400 supporters who rallied here, I would like to ask you to please recognize the supporters of Prop S. Nearly 2/3 of San Francisco voters recently demonstrated how important and vital the arts are to the city's identity. At San Francisco Ballet, our youth programs reach over 5,000 students, and we have dance programs in 35 city schools across the city in all of your districts. We also work very closely with organizations in the Tenderloin community, as well as our own Civic Center and Western Addition neighborhood. We see firsthand the effects of well-established links between arts education and increased learning and achievement. We believe strongly that the arts are fundamental in making future generations the most well-rounded, empathetic, and creative they can be. I stand with the Arts Alliance, individual artists, and all of our sister organizations, large and small, in supporting no cuts to grants for the arts and the San Francisco Arts Commission, as well as adding an additional $2.5 million to their budgets this year. The ballet is proud of its long-standing and extensive services to San Francisco school children and our public schools, and its dedication to community partnerships with organizations like the Boys and Girls Club, the Bay Area Women's and Children's Center, our public libraries, our public schools, and our various arts and cultural institutions. Arts are a vital component of our children's education.
Thank you for your comments. Thank you for your comments. Next speaker, please.
Daughter.
I was the former conservatory director at the American Conservatory Theater, and I am the artistic director emeritus from the San Francisco Unified School District. And this is the room where it happens. This is where the decisions are made. And it's a pleasure to address you today and remind you that the artists are the truth tellers. They're the first ones that the dictators kill. To Deutsch Kantor's famous play, Kill the Artists First, was because he was afraid of them. We have never, as a nation or a city, been more in need of our artists because they always tell the truth. They hit the note or they don't. They are the articulators of our culture, and as Ruth Asawa was fond of reminding me, Susan, when they pit us against the food, when they pit us against shelter, we must remind everyone that you feed the body, but you must feed the spirit as well. Otherwise, we are just not animated. The truth of it, the beauty of it, the life spirit of it comes through the arts. We live in a city with some of the finest arts providers in the world. One of them is my colleague, represents the San Francisco Ballet. But there's the Symphony, the Jewish Museum, SF Jazz. All of these places that provide a campus for every one of our public school children. San Francisco is their campus. How wonderful to get to live here and know that your child goes to the AIM program and sees the symphony, or can walk up the street to the Yerba Buena Center. We must protect these things. We're living in a time when American leadership would have you think these things are extra. They are marginalizing the artists. The arts are not extra. They're essential. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker, please.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Decker, and as a working and teaching artist here in San Francisco, I ask you to support the arts. They are in need now more than ever. San Francisco is such an expensive city to survive in, and our artists are suffering and our organizations are struggling. People visit our city, our beautiful city, and our unique city from every corner of the world. Art really is a universal language. Lost my place, sorry. Everyone understands beauty and the importance of visual communication and reflection. History proves it. Where would we be without the Leonardo da Vinci's, the Picassos, and the Banksys? I support no further cuts to the grants for the arts and San Francisco Arts Commission. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker, please.
Hello, my name is Beth Molnar, and I'm the founder and director of Green Art Workshop, which is a small arts education nonprofit based here in San Francisco. I support no cuts to grants for the arts and the Arts Commission, and an additional $2.5 million to their budgets this year, because people like me who work in the arts and care about the soul of San Francisco are worried about our ability to live here and survive here. More than 63% of San Francisco voters agree with me and want more funding for our arts. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good evening, Board of Supervisors of the City of San Francisco. My name is Sunitha Venigala, and I'm here in support of Arts Advocacy Day. I work as the Director of Real Estate Development and Partnerships at Community Arts Stabilization Trust, CAST. We are a nonprofit organization established in San Francisco in 2013, whose mission it is to acquire and develop affordable real estate for small and mid-sized local nonprofit arts and cultural organizations. We are living in unprecedented and extraordinarily challenging times. Across our country, there's a convergence of crises related to affordability, equity, and safety. Arts and cultural organizations contribute greatly to San Francisco's booming innovation economy and help to accelerate neighborhood revitalization efforts, generating numerous social, educational, and economic benefits. According to the San Francisco Center for Economic Development, the arts comprise the fourth largest growing industry in our city. The arts are a magnet, stabilizing property values, creating jobs, engaging the community, and attracting and supporting local businesses. The arts transcend class, race, income, education levels, and even politics. They bring a refreshing sense of serenity, beauty, transparency, and cohesiveness to our community. Without critical NEA, as well as NEH, CPB, and IMLS funding, many of our arts partners will be incapacitated, thereby risking the gradual extinction of San Francisco's vibrant, artistically and culturally rich ecosystem. Collectively, we are worth way more than 0.02% of the national budget, and we cannot allow organizations such as CAST and our arts partners to be further economically isolated. We are requesting no cuts to the Grants for the Arts and the San Francisco Arts Commission budgets and an additional $2.5 million to this year's cycle. We need to act now to alert our political representatives. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker, please.
Good evening, Supervisors. My name is Susie McKinnon. I serve on the board of Safe House for the Performing Arts, a small nonprofit here in San Francisco. Recently, we just secured a long-term lease and new home in the heart of the Tenderloin. This would not have been possible without the support from the city's arts agencies, as well as programs working to mitigate nonprofit displacement. Prior to this, Safe House for the Performing Arts was struggling for many years to secure a long-term home and venue due to the real estate market and the changing climate throughout San Francisco. Now, we can continue to serve hundreds of emerging and early career artists, which is a critical need for any city wishing to stay creative and keep creating. We urge you to consider increasing support for the arts agencies in light of the current proposed federal budget, threatening to dismiss support for the arts and culture altogether. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker, please.
Hi, my name is Jean Johnstone, and I'm the Executive Director of Teaching Artists Guild. I'm really happy to be in front of you guys this evening. We're a San Francisco Bay Area-based organization, and we serve teaching artists nationally with services to support these critical components of our arts and education communities. I was so happy to join more than 400 other artists and arts organizations, large and small, on the steps of City Hall today, fighting for the arts and arts education. The arts, as you know, serve us all. They are the balm, they are instigator, they are economic driver, and they are empathy builder. When we lose our arts and culture, we lose the essence of our society. So I'm here also today to urge you to not cut Grants for the Arts or the San Francisco Arts Commission, and indeed to increase by $2.5 million those budgets. If anything, let's strengthen those budgets if we can. Let's show the state and the country what we stand for. And if I and we here today are preaching to the choir, then let's stand up and sing. Thank you so much. Have a good evening.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Supervisor. My name is Eric Arguello. I am with Calle 24 Latino Cultural District, and we are here in support for Grants for the Arts and the San Francisco Arts Commission. These are vital organizations that provide grants for a lot of our nonprofit arts organizations in the Latino Cultural District to do programming for the Latino Cultural District. They provide a lot of opportunities for our youth to get involved. It provides a lot of jobs for folks in the area, for other artists, independent artists, to get involved with the organizations and the cultural district. We're also here to ask to provide additional funding for these organizations. $2.5 million to their budget will really go a long ways to help sustain our organizations, sustain the Latino Culture District for the future and for the future of our kids. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hello, my name is Scott Kuiper. I'm an unpaid advocate for the arts. I'm a native of the Bay Area, and I've lived in San Francisco for most of my adult life. Prop S, as you saw, passed with 63% of the vote. In almost any other voting or political contest, that is seen as a landslide, but it was just shy of the amount we needed. What Prop F was trying to do was not really asking for new funding, but asking to reinstate funds that had previously been approved for arts budgets in San Francisco through the Hotel Tax Fund. There have been millions lost from our budget by previous mayors' administrations, the current one eventually dwindling it down to zero. So really what we're trying to do with this is to reinstate the money that we have had removed from these essential organizations. The arts have been in a state of crisis for years now, and the arts in our creative class have been in a state of crisis. We've had an exodus for eviction for several years, to the point that the conversation has been shifting not from community in crisis, but to overall colony collapse. It is getting to that point. If we don't act now to release some pressure, and not just keep people in place, but actually reseed new space for artists, educators, and cultural contributors to continue to live here and return to their former homes in order to help create and maintain diverse neighborhoods and the sort of roles that these groups have provided. Artists and teachers are viewed as a protective class from HUD, and we need to start coming up with a specific plan to create new housing to help support these organizations and individuals that have been so essential to the landscape and the community of San Francisco. It's what San Francisco is known for. It's really telling in modern times. The San Francisco in the Summer of Love, I mean, everybody in the world knows about that, and we did not allow them to celebrate in the park this year. We really need your help to start coming through for San Francisco culture and not just for the latest housing development. These things are essential to help preserve us be here. Again, I've been here most of my life. I've got 5 months left in my current place, and that will be the end of it. We used to house 26 artists. There'll be 140 units of housing there, but really there's no solution to keep any of these people I used to work with in these homes. So basically, I'm going to look at setting up housing, having artists.
Thank you very much for your comments. Thank you. Next speaker, please. And if there are any more members of the public who'd like to provide public comment, please line up. Mr. Gilberti, welcome back.
Thank you. It's nice to be back. Tom Gilberti. I was in college, 1968, 72. There was a little tidbit that came out during that time from the Club of Rome. And it wasn't popist, it wasn't Catholic. And it was limits to growth. And, of course, it was shoo-shoo, hoo-hoo. It was just a little tidbit appeared. And right here, I can prove that there's limits to growth. And we'll use the overhead, please. The housing plan, the fifth point of the housing plan, we start at the bottom, 20% community-specific needs. Seniors, affordable homes, artists, people from navigation systems, graduated foster children, 20%. Above that, 20% teacher, police, fire, muni employees. Above that, 5% seniors from all around the city that can move out of their homes. 15%, 20-year residents in the local zip codes. That can be 35-year-old people, 25-year-old people, 40, 55-year-old people. Then we go to 10% in the local zip codes again for the seniors, and then we have 30% open market. And if it's residential rental, it's rent controlled. We can't do that. There are limits to growth. We can't do that because we're limits, in this case, to profits. The city can't do it on its own either, 100%. Now we go back to second grade and third grade. May we do it? No, there's not enough profits. Can we do it? Can these be built? Can this stamp plate work? Yes, it can. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other members of the public who'd like to provide public comment at this time? Seeing none, public comment is now closed. Madam Clerk, please read the without reference to committee items.
Items 26 and 27 are being considered for adoption without committee reference. A single roll call vote may enact these items. A member may object, have an item severed and considered separately.
Supervisor Yee?
Sever 27.
All right. Roll call vote on item number 26.
On item 26, Supervisor Sheehy.
Aye.
Sheehy, aye. Supervisor Tang.
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Yee.
Aye.
Yee, aye. Supervisor Breed.
Aye.
Breed, aye. Supervisor Cohen.
Aye.
Cohen, aye. Supervisor Farrell. Farrell absent. Supervisor Fewer.
Aye.
Fewer, aye. Supervisor Kim. Kim, aye. Supervisor Peskin.
Aye.
Peskin, aye. Supervisor Ronan. Ronan, aye. Supervisor Safai.
Aye.
Safai, aye. There are 10 ayes.
Okay, the resolution is adopted unanimously. And Madam Clerk, I failed to request Supervisor Farrow had to depart and asked to be excused as of 5:22 p.m. Is there a motion to excuse him as of that time? Moved by Supervisor Tang, Seconded by Supervisor Ronan. Colleagues, can we take that without objection? Without objection, Supervisor Farrell is excused as of 5:22 p.m. Please read the next item.
Item 27 is a resolution to support California State Senate Bill 807, the Teacher Recruitment and Retention Act of 2017, authored by Senators Stern, Gagliani, Limon, and Santiago, authorizing a credit for new teachers equal to the costs incurred by a qualified taxpayer teacher to earn a clear credential.
Supervisor Yee.
Thank you, President Bree. Well, probably don't have to tell this group, but research demonstrates that the most important school factor affecting public achievement is the classroom teacher. Pupils with well-trained teachers are more likely to earn higher salaries, attend college, save more for retirement, and less likely to be teenage parents. Today, California schools are facing an unprecedented critical teacher shortage. Enrollment in teacher preparation programs has plummeted 70 to 76% statewide over the past decade, and currently over 75% of the school districts have difficulties filling positions, including San Francisco Unified School District. Districts report that the shortage is widespread and increasing and comes from the shrinking supply of new teachers, teachers leaving the district and the profession, as well as retirements. Districts pay a substantial cost to recruit, hire, and train new teachers. Due to high turnover, high-need schools must continually invest in recruitment efforts, professional support, without reaping the benefits of many of these investments. Today, there are over 150,000 students in California being taught by temporary teachers. The number of teacher permits and waivers being sought by districts as temporary fixes has increased by more than 270% in just 4 years. And this doesn't count our students being taught by long-term substitutes. With the elimination of state and local district financial support for mandatory training and mentoring, some teachers face unexpected paycheck deductions for trainings required to clear a credential and legally teach in California. SB 807 recognizes the significance of teachers to the children and the economy of California by providing tax incentives to help new teachers gain the skills they need to be successful and keep experienced teachers in the classrooms. Specifically, SB 807 structurally addresses the current and growing shortage of teachers across the state by providing tax credits in the first 5 years to help teachers complete required training to remain in the classroom. Then it also incentivizes qualified teachers with at least 6 years of experience to stay or return in the classroom by exempting teaching income from state income tax. This is why I urge my colleagues to support the state passage of SB 807, the Teacher Retirement and Retention Act of 2017. And I want to thank my co-sponsors, Supervisors Ronan, Peskin, and Kim. Thank you.
Thank you, and please add me as a co-sponsor as well.
Thank you, Madam President.
Colleagues, can we take this item, same house, same call? Without objection, the resolution is adopted unanimously. Madam Clerk, please read the in memoriams.
Yes, today's meeting will be adjourned in memory of the following beloved individuals at the suggestion of Supervisor Yee and Supervisor Peskin for the late Mr. Philip P. Choi, at the suggestion of Supervisor Peskin and on behalf of the entire Board of Supervisors, for the late Miss Natalie Berg.
Thank you, colleagues. This brings us to the end of our agenda for today. Madam Clerk, is there any further business before us?
That concludes our business for today.
Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.